So guys, what if Naruto x Fem Sasuke x Rias x Harem special movie? As he had stared death in the eye, or rather, his best friend during his final moments, Naruto had gone through every moment in his life that had meant something up to that point, until eventually he was claimed by what should been eternal darkness. It was at that moment that he should died. In his final moments, had talked with her, about anything, and everything that felt appropriate, reminiscing about the days in the academy, before everything went wrong, their first mission that had gone horribly wrong once they'd encountered a couple of rogue nin from Kiri, and up until the retrieval mission. They'd shared a couple of quick jokes about that fight, and the irony that their last one had been here as well. It felt a bit poetic that the place that started the last parts of their journey was also the place that ended it. Before he felt his consciousness start to leave him, had seen the people that helped him before his eyes, his parents, the old man Sandame, the pervy sage, Kakashi-sensei, and all of his friends had made along the way. In the end, he couldn't really say that he had many regrets. His biggest regret was that he hadn't made it to Hokage, but he had managed to save her, and in the end, that's what really mattered to him. Their endless game of cat and mouse had come to an end right where it had started. So, had died with a smile on his face. Well, that was what he had believed at least. It was safe to say had been surprised and flabbergasted once his consciousness had developed enough to understand that he wasn't dead, no, had been reborn in a world that was beyond strange. At least to him, since everything that once been normal to him was practically a fairy tale here. Well, everything in this world was what should been a fairy tale, the irony of the fate that he had tried to deny for his entire life. It wasn't that bad, aside from the fact that he missed everyone in the place he used to call home. His new family had also questioned why he hadn't referred to the mansion as his home for quite a while, but had managed to blame it on the stupidity of being a kid until he had gotten enough used to the place. He couldn't quite get used to the idea of not being an orphan anymore either. It was quite surreal. In this place, he had parents that loved him, an older sister, and an older brother as well. Everything had ever wanted really. Though, he still felt that something was missing, and he didn't need to think long about it before an image to mind. He often thought about his past like this, sitting in his room, just staring out of the window as the image of her face, the rare times she smiled, came to mind. Even after 17 years, he could still remember her face clear as day. Then again, people always said the first thing you forgot was the sound of their voice, and he missed it a great deal. He let out a soft sigh as the image faded from his eyes, and watched his reflection in the window. Well, it was ironic, he couldn't stop himself from letting out a few chuckles. In this life, had probably gotten the appearance that his first mother, Kushina, had hoped had gotten back in the elemental nations. Well, had once been blonde, he was now a redeed. His hair was as usual, pretty messy, but his facial structure reminded him more of his new older brother, and his eyes had the same blue-green look to them. His wardrobe had also gone through a bit of a change. Well, that was probably what you had to expect when you got reborn as a son of the House of Grigori. Currently, it was his sister that was the heiress, and she was in an unfortunate situation. She was betrothed to the youngest son of the House of Phoenix, an absolute asshole, if you were to ask him. Naruto let out a small grunt as he stood up and watched himself in the reflection. He could be seen wearing a long red jacket that was unzipped, thus revealing the black long-sleeved shirt beneath. To finish it off, he was wearing black pants, boots, and brown shoulder guards on top of the jacket. While orange was usually his preferred color, he couldn't quite help but love red, as had told his mother back when he met her in the seal that held Kurama, had have loved to have her red hair. And now, well, he did have that hair, though he was still missing a lot from his old home. It was one of those situations where every time he went to bed in the evening, had felt a clenching in his chest. While thinking back to the countless memories he had, he really missed them all. And while he cared deeply for his family here, there wasn't much he wouldn't trade for a chance to speak to everyone back home again, at least just for a little while. Especially because he didn't know if they were alright, whether or not they were still trapped in the infinite Tsukiyomi. He could only wonder about it, since there were no real answers to his question, no matter how hard he looked for them. As he sat there in the window of his room in the underworld, just thinking, he soon found himself brought out from his line of thought. A magic circle of communication appeared before his ear, which made him raise his brow in surprise. "Naruto? Are you awake?" A soft feminine voice spoke about, as he nodded. Well, not that she could see it, so it was probably more for himself than anything. He chuckled a bit and moved down from the windowsill, and went to lay down in his bed, staring up at the ceiling as he kicked his boots off. "Yeah, I'm awake. What can I do for you, Rias? Is everything alright?" A silent laugh met his ears as he folded his arms under his head. "Just wanted to hear your voice. It's been a bit since I've seen my little brother after all. How is life treating you?" "Well enough, just training and studying a bit every now and then. I hate books though, Dad can't give me a break about it," he snorted with a small pout. Rias let out another small laugh at that. "Yeah, I can imagine. Just hang in there. Are you coming to Kuo anytime soon?" Naruto let out a soft hum as he readjusted himself on the bed. "I don't know, I probably could. I don't feel like staying down here much longer anyway. Let's just say that Dad and I are butting heads about more than just the whole studying thing. it's a bit of a problem really. Please, go easy on him, I think I got an idea why you're arguing so much, Rias sighed softly. They'll try, but it's not easy, I don't like what's going to happen with you, I wish I could do something. But that old man is even more stubborn than you can be, he joked idly and ran a hand through his crimson locks. His older sister, well he couldn't see it, was smiling on the other end of the line as she spoke softly to him. Not much we can do about it, I really don't want to either, you know that, maybe just maybe, we can find a solution, I don't want to just have someone picked out for me, you know. I want to be able to pick the person myself. Naruto once again nodded. Yeah, I know, I'll talk to you soon Rias, I'm gonna go out and train here in a bit, I need to get some frustrations out of my system. Alright, take care Naruto, come visit soon, even Akeno misses you, she joked slightly, as the connection along with the magic circle disappeared from his ear, and he sat up again. Naruto sat up and put on his boots again as he started to wander around his room, which was fairly large, well, they did live in a mansion, so he had everything he could dream of inside his room, like, if he didn't need food, he could live in there with no trouble at all. It made him chuckle a bit since he was once forced to live in an apartment where you couldn't even count on the water temperature or whether or not the fridge was cooling properly. He'd never forget that spoiled milk from before he got on Team 7. While he normally despised the idea of fate, he had to thank it for one thing though, had somehow, despite the ridiculously low chance, managed to keep his old name, Naruto, so he at least had that, for as long as he was going to be in this world. And since had found out devils almost lived forever well, there was a chance he'd be here for a really long time. He wouldn't jinx anything though, since he had quite the history of getting into trouble. With the last chuckle at that thought, he exited his room and began walking down the hallway of the mansion. Each stop would echo slightly off the walls as he minded his own business, but he did politely greet the maids that occasionally passed by him as they were carrying out their duties for the day. Where are you going at this hour, Naruto? Naruto stopped in his track as the familiar sound of a voice had grown up with met his ears. He stood completely still as he closed his eyes for a second, taking in a breath before he turned his head to meet the gaze of a man with long red hair that looked a lot like him. Naruto fidgeted a bit in place as he replied, just going out to train, to vent some frustrations I guess, I won't take long. Zeodicus let out a slight hum as he gathered his hands behind his back, may I ask why you're frustrated? The younger Ried clenched his fist and dug his nails into the palm of his hand as a sour look fell upon his face. I'm quite sure that you know why I'm angry, and yet, you still don't seem to care, so why do you want to address it again? Do you like making me mad or something? His father narrowed his eyes slightly as he became visibly a bit tenser. I don't like that tone you're using. Well that's an odd coincidence, I don't like the decisions you make, Naruto shot back with a roll of his eyes. Zeodicus frowned as his lips fell into a thin line, what is this really about? You've been hostile for quite a while, it worries your mother and me, we figured you were long past this phase. Naruto threw his arms out in a shrug as he turned around to face his father, then you tell me how I'm supposed to feel, you're forcing my sister to marry some kind of a self-obsessed asshole, and for what, it makes you look good. I don't get it. It is her duty, I've explained this many times in the past son, Zeodicus defended, stressing his sentence through his teeth. The Grigori snorted at it with a mocking chuckle, you're right, like it's apparently my duty to believe whatever crap you feed me, how can you do that to her? Give me one good reason outside the usual crap that makes it seem like you got any right to do what you're doing. Zeodicus stepped up to him with a shake of his head, she is the heiress to the house of Grigori, she has a duty to this house, and this is it, it'll give us a tie to the phoenix, can't you see how much is at stake? Me? What about yourself, can't you see that it's ruining her life? You got no right to mess around with her life like it's some kind of chess piece in some stupid game, Naruto shouted back as he slammed his fist against the wall. The older Grigori rubbed the bridge of his nose, you will never learn, it seems, why can't you understand, that as the head of a house in a society like ours, you sometimes need to make decisions that serve a higher purpose. I don't know, maybe because it's beyond stupid and irrational, you are forcing Rias, my sister, to be degraded into some kind of object, if that's how you treat your family, then I want out, strip me of my name, I don't give a crap, if that's family love of the Grigori I'd rather have no last name, Naruto hissed out through gritted teeth, refusing to look his father in the eyes. Zeodicus unfolded his arms from behind his back and gave the young man a small glare, I'm starting to believe I've spoiled you too much, I had high hopes for you, yet you stand before me as nothing but a child. Naruto laughed as he walked up to his father, standing just a few inches away, and you're an old man and a fool. I think it's about time that you back off before you force me to do something I'll regret son, Zeodicus warned in a dangerous tone. The younger Ried rolled his eyes as he stood right up in his dad's face, oh I'm starting to want you to make me, come on then. Before any of them could say anything further, a form stepped in between them and pushed Naruto slightly backward with a gentle push. Then Alana? Zeodicus asked as he looked down at his wife with a sense of curiosity in his gaze. The brown-haired woman shook her head and held a hand on her youngest child's shoulder, how about you go to our room Zeodicus, I'll speak with our son and resolve this issue, let's not make any bad blood come into this family. He is being disrespectful, he does not know his place in this house, Zeodicus said with a shake of his head. Then Alana sighed, our room, now, I said I'd handle this, and I plan to do so. The head of the Grigori family shot a look between his wife and his son, before he sighed and left without another word. The echoes of his footsteps would soon start to faint until they could no longer be heard. Jerk, Naruto snorted and crossed his arms over his chest, looking out of the window as he tried to calm himself down. Then Alana shook her head and patted his arm, I know you're having a hard time coming to terms with the arrangement, I just hope that you know, that while your father sees this as the best for the house, his views as a dad are completely different, don't you think he'd rather our Rias found true love somewhere? Naruto shrugged his shoulders, how should I know, all he seems to care about is our damn name. His mother let a faint smile grace her lips as she reached up to touch his cheek and turn his head, look at me, your dad loves Rias, don't misunderstand his actions for anything they're not. I can't understand them if I don't know what he is thinking, he answered in a soft tone, well he was angry at his dad, his mother hadn't done anything wrong as far as he knew. Then Alana just patted his hand and readjusted his jacket, take a trip to Kuo, go visit your sister, I think both you and your father need a bit of space to think clearly. Plus, Rias always knew how to calm you down, I doubt she would have an issue this time too then. The Redeed scratched the back of his head, fine, I plan to go there soon anyway. Then be on your way, say hi to Rias for me, I'll try and talk with Zeodicus, but I can't promise much, you know how it is, make sure she is alright, I can understand if she is stressed out. His mother finished with a small squeeze of his hand before she started walking down the hallway in the same direction his father had went. As he watched her disappear around the corner, he let out a breath he didn't know had been holding, if Venelana was anything like Kushina, she probably had everything under control. It made him laugh a bit, there really was nothing like a mother's wrath, oh well, he'd have to take an opportunity to kick his old man's ass another time. 9L. Irideed waltzed through the streets of Kuo leading toward the academy, as he whistled a soft tune to himself, it was mostly just to pass the time as he made his way to the occult research club, though as he got there, he sweat dropped at the sight of the very much empty room. Hello? He called out into the room and blinked, but there came no response. It was quite odd because he for sure knew that Rias was around the club room at this time, they should be out doing contracts, but it felt like something was wrong. Naruto clicked his tongue as he looked around the place for a bit and took a seat in Rias' chair at the lone desk in the room, swinging his feet up onto the table. He sat with his fingers folded across his stomach as he counted the seconds passing, which wasn't for very long, since his impatience started to show. But the grunt, he stood up again and began to exit the building, well, if there was one way to surprise her, he could always just track her down. He let out a soft chuckle as he opened the door leading outside and leaped into the air, folding out his wings, which he still was quite amazed about, and flew in the direction he could feel Ria's magic signature, though something was off, and that was the amount that was leaking around in the area. Either she was having a violent argument with Akeno again, or there was trouble, either way, he decided that he probably should hurry a tad bit more as he flew over the city of Kuo. The lights of the street lamps below him passed by in blurs as he got to the outskirts of the town, and had to raise a brow at the sight of a church. That's weird, he commented as he stopped in the middle of the air a couple of 100 feet away, so he could look in through the windows. His blue-green eyes eyed the situation inside carefully, which wasn't something his former self would done, but since had been born anew had have a lot of opportunities to learn to be better. The scene in front of him caused many questions to rise in his mind. The church looked, well, destroyed, but the people in there were what caught his attention. On the left side, toward the door, he could see his sister, and what appeared to be 4 members of her peerage, if he were to judge by their uniforms. He knew 3 of them, Akeno, Kaneko, and Kiba, but the last one that had to be someone new, and judging by the red gauntlet he was wearing, he had to be a user of a sacred gear. Even with that in mind, he looked worse for wear, with a hole dripping blood in both his legs, leaving him nothing but a cripple in the current situation that looked like it was about to escalate any second. But who is that? He asked out loud next, his eyes narrowed at the group on the opposite side of the church. He could see 5 individuals, and the thing they had in common was the fact that they were fallen angels. They were quite a colorful bunch, with 3 women and 1 guy. But there was something strange about particularly one of them. 4 of them were looking like they were about to drop unconscious from exhaustion and wounds, and had 1 pair of wings. However, the woman at the front had 6 wings, and she looked perfectly fine. Naruto hummed thoughtfully as he flew down to the entrance of the church and leaned in against one of the support beams to listen in on the conversation, while head usually just rather drop down through the ceiling. This was a more sensitive matter that he couldn't quite just disturb in case he got the wrong idea. You know I can't just let you go without further ado after such an incident. It won't look well for the house of Grigori, he could hear his sister say as he crossed his arms over his chest. Though the next voice seemed just a tad bit uninterested, I don't see that you have much of a choice. Well, there might be 5 of you and 5 of us. You're still severely outnumbered, your servant can barely stand and he is guarding a corpse. Rias snorted, while Lissay might not be able to fight, it doesn't look like your crew can do much better. We've already established we're superior in that matchup, so what will the addition of you increase in terms of chances? The woman sighed slightly, that will not be an issue, either way, the chances are in my favor, I don't see the need to make any more out of this situation, the odds are not in your favor Lady Grigori. Naruto shook his head as he figured that was his cue to get involved, well, he probably shouldn't, but he'd be damned if anyone talked to his sister that way without him having a say in what was going to go down next. Leaning up from the wall, he cracked his knuckles and entered through the front door, then how about we even the odds? He called out as his footsteps began to echo throughout the church, his appearance catching the attention of the people inside, who all had mixed opinions upon seeing him. Rias looked both pleased and surprised, but there was also a hint of anxiety on her face, she probably had no idea what her unpredictable little brother was about to do or why he was here in the first place. The fallen angels looked both skeptical and annoyed, the favor they were certain they had was starting to look slimmer by the second. Naruto? What are you doing here? Rias asked as she took a step back to meet him halfway there, standing quite close to him as she kept her eyes glued to the group of fallen in front of them. Upon hearing the name of the newcomer, the fallen angel with 6 wings eyes widened for a brief moment, a look that couldn't quite be described was on her face, until she visibly calmed herself down again, it was like she'd seen a ghost, which caused both a sense of curiosity and fear to go through her subordinates behind her. Irideed shrugged his shoulders, I thought I'd come and visit my sister, but I guess you were already having guests. Oh trust me, they were not invited, she shot back with a snort. Yet you do not seem keen on letting us go, one of the fallen angels with blue hair mouthed through gritted teeth. The Grigori heir scratched the back of his head, okay so can I get a rundown of the situation and the names here? Because like, they might be fallen, but it'd feel weird about calling them fallen 1, fallen 2, you get what I mean. His older sister that to fight the urge to show an amused smile, well from left to right, there is the one that started all of this, Rainer, and her 3 accomplices, Donaseek, Kalwerner and Middled. What about the one in the front? Naruto asked next, as his eyes narrowed slightly. At this, Akeno bit the inside of her cheek, that is my sister Sayori. At the mention of that name, a flash of pain went through his head, Naruto visibly grunted as several images of his past life came to mind again, and he grasped his forehead. It was a name he hadn't expected to hear again, and once he took a look at her, it only made it worse, because she looked just like her, with a tad bit of differences, but it was the same raven hair and onyx eyes. He felt a bit of nausea build up within him, as he could have sworn it was her, that even a stranger with a picture from the elemental nations would say it was the same girl, but it was impossible. Are you okay? Rias asked with concern as she touched his arm with a worried gaze. The younger Rideed gave a quick nod as he was brought out of his line of thought, yeah I'm alright, so what's the situation? Rias sighed and took a step forward, not truly convinced, but decided to let it go for now. Let's just say they haven't been playing nice, and Rainer even went as far as to both kill and torture my new pawn, Issei, and killed a holy sister to steal her sacred gear on our territory. With the amount of disrespect and actions against our house, I cannot let them go with just a lifted finger. The younger brother bit his tongue as he let out a grunt, you there, he called out to the one at the front, trade offer, give us one of your subordinates as a penalty for the actions done against our family, and well let the rest of you go. Sayori narrowed her eyes at him, I don't have the power to do that, it is not within the orders I've been given. You know this can only end one of 2 ways, and I gave you the most peaceful solution, he retorted with a hand on his hip. The raven-haired woman gave him a curious stare, am well aware, I've given my solutions. She paused and looked back with a look that turned stone cold serious, you 4, leave, now. Rainer shook her head as she stood back up to her feet, Lady Sayori, we couldn't possibly. I gave you a direct command, and you'd only make everything worse. It'll make sure Azazel hears of this, she interrupted quickly, effectively silencing the red-eyed woman who reluctantly let out of her wings and flew out through a broken window behind them, soon followed by the rest of the fallen angels. Rias took a quick step forward, what do you think you're doing? I wasn't done yet. As the crimson-haired girl finished her sentence, her queen was quick to follow up, that's enough, what can you possibly hope to accomplish by this? It has gone too far, and you know it. Sayori sighed with a small frown as she took a step forward as well, as I said, I have my orders, well the inconvenience it causes for you doesn't please me, I'd rather not betray my direct superiors in a similar fashion as the others, they have caused enough problems with the current situation. With a quick glance between the 2 women, Naruto reached forward and placed a hand on Ria's shoulder, why don't you let me handle this one? It should be me, her subordinates have hurt members of my peerage, Rias quickly replied. Naruto shook his head, that's true, but she hasn't, and given him an intruder here as well, why don't you just let us misfits sort this one out? Go take care of your new peerage member, he looks ready to break down or pass out or both, I can't really tell. Well, it didn't please her, she cold and denied that her peerage did need some attention. Well, they'd been winning with little difficulty, aside from Issei who got quite beaten up, the tables had turned completely once Akeno's sister had shown up, even Kiba and Kaneko had some bruises, so Rias knew that the raven-haired woman was quite a formidable opponent compared to the others. Fine, but don't get hurt, Rias relented, as some of her caring sides began to show. Oh, don't worry, it'll be fine, after all, I'm the strongest, he chuckled and began walking a couple of steps forward toward what inevitably become his opponent of the day. The dark-eyed woman shook her head as she dropped down from the altar she had been standing on. I don't know if you've been in a fight before, but there is usually not this much talking, she commented with what appeared to be a small grin on her face. I'm well aware, Naruto commented as he stopped in place, eyeing the woman in front of him, part of him cold the flickering image out of his head, that it was the same girl he had once been on a team with, he knew better though, had lost in that last fight and died. So well he could easily imagine that scratched headband on this woman's forehead, and recognized they shared the same name, he knew it wasn't her, it was not the girl he had spent several years chasing after back in the elemental nations. So? She began, visibly on edge as she stared him down. The situation was tense, to most it just be because of the inevitable fight, however, to them, it was because they both felt like they were seeing someone they hadn't seen in a lifetime. Ladies first, Naruto commented with a slight chuckle, making both Rias and Kaneko roll their eyes in the background. The woman rolled her eyes, please, spare me of the false chivalry, it's disgusting, she retorted quickly as she thrust her palm forward, and immediately thunder could be heard. Naruto looked around him quickly, unable to spot any lightning, though as the magic became noticeable, he flipped backward as a bolt of pure white lightning struck down through the ceiling, lighting the carpet aflame. However, it didn't stop there, no, instantaneously afterward lightning bolts began crashing through the windows, sending glass shards flying all over the church. The benches following the example of the carpet as the entire place was soon filled with a mix of smoke and flames. Thinking quickly, he leaped up against a wall to get down beside her. He clapped his hands together as he channeled his power of destruction before he thrust both of his palms toward the ground. It wasn't a largely concentrated burst of power, but it was enough to create a brief shockwave that forced her to dash backward and out of the window behind her. As he saw that his plan had worked in regard to getting her out into the open, he quickly followed her. However, to avoid some kind of ambush, he used the window on the opposite side of the church and instead used his wings to fly quickly over the roof. Since Rias had to be focused on gathering her peerage and taking care of them, he figured a lot of smoke and fires wouldn't help her. Before he could re-enter the fight, he was forced to maneuver around a barrage of light hurled at him at, well, light speed. He retracted his wings and spun down between them, rearing his fist back as a red glow started to form around it. Sayori narrowed her eyes as she raised her hand to form a defensive magic circle to meet the impact of the incoming redeed, and was forced to widen her eyes in surprise when his fist effortlessly shattered the defensive spell like it was a mere glass pane. She forced herself to hold back a chuckle as she flipped backward and slammed a fist into the ground as dark clouds started to gather above them. Naruto did a quick grimace as he figured out what she was intending and quickly thrust his hand toward the incoming lightning bolts, letting a stream of red destructive power, almost looking like crimson flames, seemingly devour them. Her plan had worked as intended, the fallen angel dashed forward and spun around on her feet, letting her heel swipe straight toward his chin. The redeed saw it coming and ducked quickly beneath it, using what had determined to be an opening to send a roundhouse kick toward her stomach, which she seemed to effortlessly catch in the palm of her hand, keeping a tight grip on the sole of his foot as he commented, "I'm surprised, I haven't met many that are skilled at hand-to-hand combat." Likewise, she shot back quickly and pushed his foot up into the air and let go before she dropped down to swipe her leg at his lone foot that was still located on the ground. Naruto let out a swift grunt as he jumped into the air and spun around to evade the attack. They'd sent him crashing down on his rear and responded quickly by placing his palm against the ground and angled his body to swipe a kick to the top of her head. The raven-haired fallen angel leaned back as she watched his foot fly by right in front of her eyes. Annoyed with how persistent he was, she blitzed forward and launched a series of kicks and punches at him, aiming for every anatomic weak spot she could potentially strike with her full strength. But it wasn't working. No matter how they were moving around, his hands and legs were matching her speed perfectly. It was frustrating, yet exhilarating at the same time. With the exception of her father and a handful of others in the Grigori, it was rare that she found an opponent that was as adaptable as her in the martial arts. Though it was easy to see that her fighting style was much more refined than his, even though he could keep up with her. The two let out a shout as the soles of their feet clashed once again, the force of the impact sending them sliding in each their direction respectively before they regained their footing. Naruto decided at that point had been on the defensive for long enough and swirled his palms around in front of him, letting his wrists touch as a red magic circle appeared from which a giant seemingly flaming serpent flew out toward the dark-eyed woman. She narrowed her eyes and evaded it by flipping sideways over it, forming 3 quick light spears that she shot straight through the snake's midsection, watching it explode into a small shockwave that sent her hair swaying around in the hair behind her. Sayori grunted as she thrust her hand to the side of a small magic circle, from which she quickly pulled out a sword, a Japanese shakudo, to be specific. This game has gone on long enough, she called out as she channeled her magic through the blade, letting the shining metal get coated in pure white crackling lightning. Naruto couldn't help but feel a sense of deja vu at the sight, but quickly shook his head and mirrored her action. One thing had picked up from his memories of his Sayori, along with the training had undergone in the underworld, was to never underestimate the art of swordsmanship. This world had many blades with all kinds of different yet terrifying powers, so it was more than beneficial to be able to wield one, in case you were either forced to fight with a blade, or you found yourself in the possession of one. Rias sighed as he grabbed onto the hilt of a sword that his older brother had gifted him a couple of years ago, and dragged it out of its magic circle, revealing a crimson broadsword with a rapier-styled hilt. Then let's get a move on, I was getting bored, he retorted as he let the power of destruction coat his already crimson blade, making it appear like it was a flame in contrast to her lightning-covered shakudo. The woman rolled her eyes as she dashed forward, slashing the crackling blade at his neck that he quickly blocked. A mix of sparkles encased in crimson flames, and white lightning flew over the field and through the trees with each lightning-fast clash. From afar their blades would merely look like a pair of twin windmills glowing colorfully that occasionally slammed together, sending shockwaves all over the area as the speed got more and more picked up between them. Despite feeling confident in his swordsmanship, Naruto had to admit that she was way better or just more experienced with the blade. Each deadly stab and slash would put him more and more on the defensive. The occasional opening would allow him to get a bit more aggressive and push her a couple of steps back, but she'd return the gesture tenfold afterward. He was starting to visible sweat as they flew through the woods, watching the tree lines blur past their field of vision as they avoided branches and boulders in their way. Eventually, the Redeed couldn't keep up anymore and felt his blade swiped out of his hand as he landed on the grass with Sayori a few feet away from him. He could hear his blade swirling down through the air before it embedded itself within a boulder. I guess I still got a bit to learn, he commented as he snapped his finger, letting the magic circle retract the blade away from the human realm. Sayori eyed the action and held up her blade, the metal doing a small clink as she pointed the tip of her blade at him. Does that mean you are ready to admit defeat? I would rather not have to spill your blood if I don't have to, I have no desire for hostility between our factions. Redeed rubbed the back of his neck as he slammed his foot into the ground, using the cloud of dirt and debris to backflip up on top of the boulder his blade had previously been embedded into. Sorry, I can't do that, I made a promise to Rias, and am not going to break it, I don't go back on my word, call it a personal code if you wish, he chuckled as he reared his palm back into the air, whilst in a crouched down position, and thus decided that he might as well take the fight a step further. Since Head found himself enjoying the fight a bit more than he should, he hadn't gone all out, also because he didn't want to start a new war. Despite having found himself with a whole new power in this world, Naruto had done everything in his power to recreate his very own invention, a thing that had come in clutch several times in the elemental nations. When Head gotten a good mastery of the power of destruction, Head worked his hardest at combining that with the concept of the Rasen Shuriken, which resulted in the enormous spinning crimson shuriken in his hand at this moment. The concept of cutting with the wind was replaced with the red and black blades born out of the concept of destruction itself. Though, before he could do anything with his creation, his heart stopped in his chest. As the cloud of debris cleared between them, he was met with a sight that haunted his dream for several years. With his field of vision now clear, a pair of eyes as equally shocked and terrified as his own were staring right back at him, or rather, the spiraling shuriken in his right behind his back. And at the same time, his eyes were staring at the huge bow compassed of crackling lightning and the tip of the deadly arrow that was aimed toward the small spot right between his eyes. A flash of pain shot through his head again as he fell down to one knee and grasped his forehead. The Rasen Shuriken faded out of his existence as he couldn't stop the images flickering in front of his eyes. The view in front of him kept switching between one of the last things he saw before he died, the very last battle he fought in his old life as Uzumaki Naruto. Sayori didn't seem to be any better. The moment she had laid eyes upon his attack, she had taken a step back and lost control of the lightning in her grasp, making it explode across the ground beside her. As she dropped down to a crouching position, her eyes practically shook as she stared him dead in the eye. "No, that's impossible," Naruto grunted out as he clenched his eyes shut to stop his blurry vision from spinning around so much that it couldn't seem to focus on the woman in front of him. She, like him, stopped and covered her mouth with her hand as her large onyx eyes roamed across his being, but instead of seeing him, she saw the faint outline of a familiar blonde man behind him. "Is that really you?" she thought to herself, too unsure of the idea in her to speak out loud. As if on cue, they lifted their heads for one last eye contact before their worlds went dark and their bodies slumped down to meet the soft grass beneath their feet. Their heads were just inches away from each other, so that the last thing they was each other's faces. The young Grigori heiress let out a worried sigh as she sat sideways on the couch within the Occult Research Club's specified clubroom. In front of her, she looked down, or more specifically, on her lap, where the head of her younger brother was currently resting. She stared down at his closed eyelids as she tried to remain calm, while idly combing his hair with her fingers, occasionally head grunt or twitch in his sleep, as if he was having a nightmare that she couldn't wake him up from even if she tried. No matter what, she could stare with her blue-green eyes, whilst making sure her beloved brother at least was comfortable until he came back from whatever was haunting him. Her mind was filled with questions at the same time. She couldn't piece together what had happened to him. As soon as she and Akeno had made sure the peerage was alright and not on the verge of death, Shed rushed after him, and much to her surprise, she had found Naruto passed out in a field of grass with sweat pouring down his forehead. At the same time, the fallen angels had returned, not to fight, but merely to retrieve one of their own. Himejima Sayuri, her queen Akeno's younger sister, had also passed out, and she couldn't help but wonder how she and Naruto had come to that state, or what had happened to them. Rias knew her brother was strong, way stronger than she was, while Shed had other priorities whilst still somewhat trying to remain at a decent enough level of strength. Naruto had prioritized training. Shed often teased him or nursed his wounds, or both, whenever he came back from training, which was a thing she deeply admired about him. He was a hard worker, in many ways. She thought she could wish that someday she could be like him. Even when Head told her that she easily could, it had felt like a distant and impossible task, one which would only shatter the remains of her self-esteem, even if that never be his true intention with the suggestion of her training to become like him. Rias. A voice called from her left, making the crimson-haired girl turn her head to meet the tired violet hues of her queen. She cleared her throat and forced a small smile onto her face. "You can go home, Akeno, I'll wait here for a little while longer. I'd rather not move him anymore until he has woken up." The dark-haired girl switched her gaze between her king and her younger brother, letting out a soft sigh as she reached down to touch his forehead, almost cursing out in surprise at how feverish his skin felt. "Do you think he is going to be okay?" "He doesn't have a choice. If he isn't, he'll kick his ass," she huffed. But Akeno couldn't be fooled by the front Rias put up. She could easily tell that the girl was much more worried than she'd openly admit. She shook her head. "I wonder what their connection is. Even when they first saw each other, it was like it wasn't the first time. I've never heard him talk about her though." Rias blinked in surprise at the suggestion of the two being connected, but in the end just shrugged. "Maybe they knew each other, maybe not. We can only play guessing games until this idiot decides his nap time is over. I know he isn't poisoned, and he isn't injured. I just can't fathom why he is still asleep like this. He looks miserable and peaceful at the same time." With a careful eye roaming down Naruto, Akeno let out a quick breath. "If anything happens, let me know. I can even stay here with you if you want. I can bring a spare change of clothes and spend the night." The Grigori shook her head. "No, go home, Akeno. I'll take care of him. No matter how stupid he can be, it's my responsibility. Used to say the same once. Oh well, have a good night, Rias." Akeno bid farewell, giving the king of their peerage a quick nod before she left through the double doors. The hinges creaked audibly throughout the room until the loud thump signaled that the doors were closed again. For about half a minute she sat there completely still. She just looked at him and wiped his sweaty forehead with a piece of cloth before she pushed him up against the cushions. With her cheeks turning a faint pink, she scooted down the cushions of the couch to lay down by his side. The lack of space that fit two people forced her to wrap her leg around his and pull her arm over his torso as she rested her head on his shoulder. Not that she'd complain. As she felt the heat of his body warm her up, she placed the palm of her hand against his cheek and dragged her nails caressingly down before they landed on top of the left part of his chest. Feeling the heartbeat in his chest, she closed her eyes, letting the comfort lull her into a gentle sleep. 9L. Naruto's eyes slowly fluttered open, his blurry gaze repeatedly trying to focus despite how the entirety of his body felt weak and heavy. He couldn't lift a leg even if he tried to, so all that was left was for his eyes to stare up at the dark sky above him. He slowly tilted his head down to the side, grunting in pain as his blue eyes settled on the form laying beside him. His blurry gaze would look down to the place their arms were meant to be, but all that could be seen were an outline of blood dripping down the rocks. A sense of worry spread through him as he watched her closed eyes, his eyes drawn to her chest, until he saw it slowly rising and falling. He breathed out a sigh of relief before turning his head back to look up at the sky. "She's still alive, thank Kami," he sighed as the relief spread through, making him relax just a tad bit through all the pain in his body. He lay there for quite a while. If here to guess, 10 minutes went by before she showed any sign of life, aside from her steady and soft breathing. Naruto smiled a bit at that, but didn't turn his head to look at her. "Yeah, I've finally come to, eh? Sayuri." At the sound of his voice, he could see her hurriedly turning her head from the corner of her eye before she winced out in pain. A look of shock and horror spread on her pretty face as she realized the damage their last attacks had done to each other. He let out a chuckle. "As you can see, if either of us moves too much, we'll bleed out and die," he stated in an awfully calm tone as he just stared at the moon. "Why?" she started in all but a soft whisper, her lone open eye staring at the side of his face. "Why would you go that far? You never attempted to cut me off, not even once. Why do you keep involving yourself with me?" She finished in another soft whisper, the tone of her voice starting to betray her. Naruto smiled again as he turned his head to watch her with a grunt, his blue eye locked with her onyx one, their faces just a tiny bit apart, because you're my friend, though that sentence had felt like a lie for a long time. A sense of deja vu washed over her as her eye widened at that, but what exactly does that mean? To you anyway? He turned his head back to look away from her, letting himself feel the deepest parts of his mind before speaking freely, since this might as well be his last chance to let her know what he really meant. "It's just that when I see you take on stuff and you get all messed up, it kinda hurts me too." Sayori let out a soft gasp at the proclaim, her remaining hand twitching idly at her side as she felt a hard clench in her chest and something prickling at the corner of her eyes, the number of thoughts running through her head, making her feel dizzy in an instant. Everything they'd been through and all had ever said and done to get her to come back to where she belonged. Come back to him. It made the pain in her chest feel so much worse as each similarity the two had growing up came crashing down over her like an avalanche. Their memories, her own and his, playing before her eyes as if the connection, their bond, allowed her to see everything there ever had been. It hurt. But it wasn't before the last one that she openly felt the tears begin to drip down her cheeks. The moment she saw herself in the group with everyone else, the realization of all the time she'd felt alone with no one to understand her. She had never really been alone. They had all been right there, but she hadn't been able to see it. She felt that it became harder to breathe as she saw the mental image, everyone, and she was right there, standing by his side, like she'd never left, because he'd never cut her off, not even tried to. As they came to again, Naruto was the first one to open his eyes. His eyes flickered around as he saw the blue sky above them and heard the gentle sound of birds in the distance. "Don't tell me this is really heaven this time." He chuckled faintly. Sayori let out a faint giggle as she looked back at him. "Looks like we passed out and slept until morning. We've failed to die again," she laughed gently. The blonde tried to sit up, but the pain in his body immediately forced him to lay back down. "Damn, guess it's too soon to move," he sighed. "And just when I thought I could punch you to wake you up," he grunted out in disappointment. Her eyes widened a bit before she burst out into a fit of giggles. Despite the pain in her chest, she couldn't help it. "What's so funny?" he asked next. Sayori turned her head to watch him again. "You really want to keep fighting?" He growled out in annoyance. "Of course. I'll fight you as many times as it takes." "I accept it." "Huh? I lost." Naruto blinked slowly before a tick mark formed on his forehead. "You idiot. This has nothing to do with winning or losing. My friend was sulking as usual, and I just wanted to punch her to wake her up." She gave him a soft smile before she closed her eyes and turned her head back. "Hey, Naruto, I accept you. If I die here, the chain of war will end. The battles since the Sage of Six Paths. This is another type of revolution. I'll decide this issue myself, once and for all." The blonde gave her an outraged look as he fought with all the strength he could find in his body to move a little closer, the blood still dripping from the place his arm used to be, until his face was just beside hers. "How can you decide anything by dying? You might as well live and help me instead if you're just gonna do that." He paused quickly before he started again. "What I want to do is cooperate with all of the shinobi. And that includes you, of course. Who says everyone else will agree to that?" she whispered softly. Naruto let out a snort. "Oh come on, do it again, let out some more crap like that. There is no telling when I may stand up to defy you again in the future," Sayori continued as she eyed her eyes to stare at him, surprised at how close his face was, their noses just inches from touching. He shook his head. "You won't do this kind of thing anymore," was his reply, filled with confidence. "How can you be sure of that?" she asked next, her lower lip slightly trembling. At this, Naruto decided that enough was enough. He could keep giving her half the truth, or he could say what he meant all along, what that had been the actual feeling in his heart throughout all this time they'd been chasing each other. "It's quite simple. For something that's felt so complicated for such a long time." He chuckled and gave her a small smile. "I love you, Sayori, and I will chase you in the next life too, if that's what it'll take for you to finally open your eyes." The look of surprise on her face spread like a wildfire as her cheeks began to heat up to turn a considerable red. Despite the bloodless shed undergone, she fumbled a bit with her words until she felt the clenching in her chest slowly begin to unravel, and a surge of happiness began to fill her up instead. "Shut up, you loser. I love you too, and thank you for everything." She expected some kind of reply from him, but when she looked toward his eyes, she noticed they were closed again. "Naruto. That's not funny." With a loud grunt, she rolled onto her stomach, panting heavily as she raised her shaky hand to feel his face. It felt cold and sticky, but as she moved her fingers down to push them against his throat, her eyes slowly widened. At the lack of a pulse, tears began to drip down her face again as her cheek slumped down against his arm. No words were able to leave her mouth, not that anyone could hear them. He was dead. Ninel, the youngest Grigori, sat up with a loud gasp as his eyes hurriedly flickered around the room to figure out where he was. His chest rose and fell as he held a hand over his heart, feeling the rapid heartbeat inside his chest as he tried his hardest to catch his breath. Those last memories, I've never dreamt of them before, but how? I was dead, wasn't I? He thought to himself, the panic spreading throughout his being until he felt a pair of warm arms wrap around his torso and something soft and squishy pressed against his stomach. The hour finally awake, I was worried, he heard someone say, and he slowly lowered his gaze to see the sleepy face of Rias laying up against his side, slowly sitting up, but not unwrapping her arm from the grasp she had on him. Naruto scratched the back of his head. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to make you worry about me. I guess I'm an idiot, telling you I'll handle things, and then you had to take care of me. Rias shook her head and flicked his nose. Nonsense, we're siblings, we take care of each other, got it? The younger Rikki just had to nod in defeat, allowing Rias to give him a relaxed yet victorious smile as she gave him a quick and tight squeeze. Did you have a nightmare? You were restless, I almost thought you were poisoned or sick. Kind of, Naruto admitted as he scratched the back of his head. I can't remember it too much though, I know how it is with dreams. The red-haired girl shook her head and sat up straight, though she leaned in against his side, so she won't fall off the couch. You always were a lousy liar, so why don't you just get to the point and tell your big sis what is wrong? Part of him felt a bit unsure of what to do next, but he decided he might as well give her at least some of the truth, even if it wasn't the complete one. It was somewhat a nightmare and I died, I guess, felt very real. Did it have something to do with the girl from today? Rias asked next, reaching up to slightly play around with his hair, just tidying it up a bit. He raised a brow at her, but didn't comment on it. She'd always been very touchy with him. She liked to just sit around and mess with his hair, and since she found it so humoring, he'd never decided to comment on it or ask her why she was doing it. No, it was someone else. It was just weird. There had been a battle, but it wasn't really part of the dream. It was just like the last moments, Ikno. That time where your life flashes before your eyes. She gave him a quick nod and a smile as she leaned up to place a small peck against his forehead. I know what you think of, but you're safe and alive, so don't worry about things like that. Naruto chuckled and returned the nod. Alright, so what happened with that girl? The blonde one, I think. Rias let out a tired sigh. In short, the fallen angels that came wanted to steal her sacred gear, Twilight Healing, and they succeeded, so she unfortunately died. My new pawn, Issei, is quite down in the dumps about it because they'd become good friends. The fallen called Rainer is the one that got it now. Couldn't you just have revived her with the evil pieces? Naruto asked curiously. She nodded her head with a small shrug following. I cold, but it didn't seem right. She was a holy sister and all that, and while I'd love to save everyone, I only have so many pieces. I can't save everyone that gets caught in the crossfire between rebellious faction groups. Naruto let out a soft hum. I think you should still do it. She is a healer, and she is probably kind if she didn't care if Issei was a devil. I don't know him, but he seemed to care for her the brief few seconds I saw him in the church. It also make him happy. Do you really think so? Isn't it a gamble? It's not that I don't want to, I'm just a bit unsure, like what would you researchers do it? He let out a few chuckles and tapped his index and middle finger against her forehead. You don't always have to compare yourself to us. You're your own person, Rias, and life is all about taking chances. Sometimes they work, sometimes they don't. What matters is what you decide to do with them afterward. Even if she doesn't get the gear back, she can still become strong and a precious person to your peerage. You make it all sound so simple, but you don't even have a peerage yet, she teased idly and rubbed her forehead. Naruto shrugged with a sheepish smile. Do it, Rias, before it's too late. I got a good feeling in my gut about it. I don't want to force you to do anything, of course, but I got a feeling that it's going to work out great. She shook her head a bit at his antics and slowly crept down from the couch and stood up to her feet, doing a small stretch that put her chest a bit more on display. Fine, I'll take your advice. Thank you, it's nice to have someone to ask advice from once in a while. While he caught himself staring a bit too much at the slight jiggle, he quickly turned his head away and inwardly cursed his former godfather for the occasional thoughts he got in situations like these. Don't you have a keno for that? Naruto asked next. Rias gave an immediate nod of her head. Of course, she is my queen and second in command. It's just a matter of perspective, and with things like this, well, I without a doubt appreciate her help. It just helps a bit that another one with evil pieces can give me their thoughts as well. The look of understanding crept onto his face as he swung his legs over the couch and stood up himself. That makes sense. Oh well, I'll go out and take a bit of air while you do all of that. I guess I need to clear my head a bit after that weird dream. Before he could wander off, she reached forward and grasped onto his wrist. Come to my place after, please. Why? Is something wrong? Naruto questioned with a raised eyebrow. Rias chewed on the corner of her lip as if she was looking for the right words to use. Let's just say I'm still worried, and I don't want to leave you out of my sight, because then you might find yourself in trouble again. And you sure it isn't just you wanting to sleep together in the same bed like when we were kids? He teased her with a small smirk. The pout formed on her lips as she elbowed him in the side. Fine, go find a bench to sleep on then. It'll be there, don't worry, now go on, and tell her I said hi, or don't she doesn't know who I am, he realized with a deadpan expression. Rias rolled her eyes a bit, but smiled nonetheless. I'll let her know, while I inform her of what happened. I'll have to take her to see Issei after. It'll help both her and him through this experience, so, it might take a bit before I'm home. You sure you can stay entertained for that long? Naruto let out a small snort as he crossed his arms over his chest. Oh, I'm sure it'll be fine. If you say so, it'll be there in a little bit, have fun. She smirked and started to leave through another door in the school building. As he stood there alone, he let out a tired sigh. He didn't enjoy lying to Rias about his nightmares or memories, but he was afraid of what she'd come to think of him. For all he know, he stole the place of who was supposed to be her actual little brother, so he didn't know whether or not he was some kind of imposter. Regardless, he couldn't dwell on it, had done that enough. No matter what he thought or said wouldn't change the fact that he was her little brother now, and he quite enjoyed that. Having an older sister like her was amazing. Even if he caught himself staring at her more often than he should, that had to be Jiraiya's fault, right? He shook his head to clear himself of those thoughts as he made his way out of the occult research club, folding out his wings as he leaped into the air and started gliding through the air and over the city, just tapping his chin as he tried to figure out where he should go. In all honesty, there was only one place he really wanted to go to, and that was the Grigori's base. He wanted to kick down the doors and stare Sayori in the face and make sure it was really her. Part of him was still unsure. It felt too good to be true. If she was here as well, then all those times had missed could finally be over. He could be reunited with her once again, one of the things he wanted most in the entire world. Naruto let out a small sigh as he landed on a nearby water tower on the outskirts of the town, holding out his palm as he summoned the queen piece of his evil pieces set. Had often wondered what she should do in regard to his peerage, because, where he came from, he was just a genin. He had of course wanted to become Hokage and be the leader of their home and everything, but now that he actually stood with the position of the king for a peerage, he wasn't sure what to do. Even after giving Rias advice about taking chances, he was being hypocritical, having doubted every idea had gotten since he got the set of evil pieces. Though, there was one thing he wouldn't ever doubt, and that was who this piece truly belonged to. Letting the white queen piece fade away from the palm of his hand, Naruto sat down on the edge of the water tower, one foot dangling over the ledge, and the other placed firmly on the top to support his arm as he rested his cheek against the palm of his hand. If it really was her, then she'd probably be here sooner or later. With how they departed from the elemental nations, there were so many things left unsaid, so many things they hadn't been able to do. 9L. Her onyx eyes opened as she stared out over the Nephilim Institute, one of the many bases of the Grigori. After he fight in the human world against some of the devils, she'd passed out after seeing someone she thought had died a long time ago. In fact, she'd seen him die. Felt him die at her side as a consequence of her own actions. The thing that had haunted her for her entire existence afterward, even once she'd been reborn, the mental image had haunted her in her sleep. Sometimes her imagination would get the better of her, making the image that much more gruesome and terrifying to think about. To think that he was alive, that he was here and in the same place as her, was a thing that made her feel a thing she hadn't in a long time, hope. In the time she had spent as a fallen angel, she'd tried to right her wrongs as much as she could, but it never felt enough. At this point, after seeing his face, she knew there was only one thing left in this world that could make her feel at peace with herself again. His forgiveness. In the midst of her train of thought, a knock sounded on her door, making her turn around with a small blink of her eyes. "Come in," she called out, standing near the window in her room as she watched a door creak open, revealing the large form of her father. Barakiel gave her a quick nod as a greeting, as he scratched his beard with a thoughtful look on his face. "Pardon the intrusion. I know you said you wanted a bit of alone time. I, however, wanted to hear how you were doing after the mission in Kuo." The faint outline of a smile lifted her lips as she returned the nod. "I'm fine, father, thank you. I see it was just unusual to hear the report from Rainer's little group," he continued, trying not to voice too obvious disappointment in regard to the fallen angels his daughter had been sent to apprehend. Sayori sighed slightly. "I assure you that I'm fine, however, there was something I wanted to ask you." With a quick raise of her brow, Barakiel just nodded. "Ask away." She crossed her arms under her chest as she leaned in against the wall, her eyes gazing out over the institute. "What can you tell me about those devils?" The Grimory House. And had it been any other house of the 72 pillars, it might been an issue. The Grimory isn't a specifically high-ranked house, with the exception of Surzich's Lucifer, since he is one of the current Satans. A Baal married into the house long ago, so the 3 children of the current head of the house all seem to possess their inherent ability. Barakiel started, rubbing his bear as he tried to sort through all the information he had available. Sayori hummed at that. "I see. What about the children?" Barakiah let out a grunt as he took a seat near the wall. The oldest is Surzich's, and the next one in line to the house of Grigori would be his little sister Rias, and then there is the youngest of the bunch, Naruto Grigori. At the mention of the last name, she felt a small clench in her chest as she grasped the fabric of her shirt. What can you tell me about Naruto? It still felt weird to say his name, but at the same time, it felt good. Is there a reason for the sudden interest? Barakiel asked. She shook her head quickly with a small shrug, even if it was a lie. No, not aside from that he is the one I supposedly fought against. While still remaining a bit skeptical, Barakiel decided to believe her for now. Well, he is a promising young man. We don't know much about him, since he isn't as public as the rest. Rias resides in Kuo, and Surzich's is the current Lucifer, so it's easier to hear information about them. Naruto, however, has seemed to remain in the underworld most of the time. Can you tell me what we do know at least? She tried again, fidgeting a bit with the sleeve of her shirt. Still unable to decipher why his daughter was like this, Barakiel continued nonetheless, as I said, he is a promising young individual. Reports state that in regard to combat prowess, he is very talented. Current rumors spreading around the underworld call him the second coming of Surzich's. Sayra's eyes widened a tad bit in surprise, but at the same time, she gave a small smile. No matter where he was, he always strived to work hard, and that made her happy at least. That meant he was most likely still the same knucklehead she remembered. I see. What's going to happen with Rainer and the others? They did manage to steal a sacred gear. Given that the sacred gear didn't belong to a devil, the major problem lies within that it all happened within Grigori's territory, despite the obvious warning from the heiress herself. Azazel is still pondering on what decision to make, though there is a chance that it'll be handed back, he pondered. She gave him a confused look. Removing a sacred gear is like a death sentence, and there is no guarantee that the sister is alive, unless she was reincarnated through one of the evil pieces. Regardless, should this become an issue with the devils, the first and most obvious way to fix the problem would be to hand back what was stolen. Barakiel sighed, not being a big fan of it himself, but it was a suggestion from one of the other fallen in charge, aside from him. Sayori fidgeted a bit in place as she turned her gaze back to her father. What if there could be struck a devil with a Grigori? The look of amusement lifted his face. What would that involve? Unsure, the sacred gear is returned. They most likely have someone in either of their peerage that would benefit from a sacred gear, should the sister still be deceased. If they're open to the idea, we could introduce the suggestion of them reincarnating Rainer. She herself would benefit from being in a place where her prejudice for devils won't be tolerated, and her lack of strength won't be tolerated as much as it does here, Sayori pondered out loud. Barakiel let out a grunt at that as a small smile lifted his lips. Well, it's an innovative idea. We can't count on it. No one says they want Rainer as a reincarnated devil. As we all know, she isn't the strongest. She herself admitted that as part of the reason she wanted Twilight healing in the first place. Along with that, she did damage to Rias Grigori's peerage and also mocked them for their race. I'm not sure that she would take that offer that well. Sayori nodded in agreement, which is why I'd suggest we send the invitation to her brother. Rias gets the gear, and we let Naruto Grigori get the offer in regard to reincarnating her. That way she avoids the death sentence, gets to work on her prejudice, and will get stronger. Everybody wins. Except Rainer, Barakiel commented. Better than being dead, Sayori countered. The large man sighed and stood up from his seat. I'll take it up with Azazel, though we'll need a messenger, and at the moment, we do not know where Naruto Grigori is. Rias is as usual within Kuo, but the younger brother hasn't been seen since the church incident a couple of days ago. Sayori responded quickly as she readjusted her black locks. Allow me to be the messenger. I'll track him down. You seem quite interested in this boy. It makes me wonder why, Barakiel voiced out loud. She shrugged. He is an interesting character. He just gave a nod at that, figuring that it was about everything his daughter would allow him to know. If that's all, I'll go have a talk with Azazel. I'm glad to see you had a swift recovery, daughter. Your condition had me worried. She raised a curious brow. I was just passed out, hardly anything to fuss about, though there was one other thing, a bit of a side question, I suppose. Well, ask away. What's on your mind? Barakiel asked. Sayori looked a bit uncertain at first as she eyed her father, chewing on the inside of her cheek, before she let her thoughts be known. If I were to hypothetically leave the Grigori one day, what would happen? Barakiel looked shocked at the question as he stood up. What brought this on all of a sudden? Nothing. I just never saw myself living here my whole life. Well, I know that as a fallen my lifespan is considerably longer than a human's. I didn't think it'd be here to the end of time, she said with a small shrug. Her father looked beyond skeptical. Does this have something to do with the Grigori boy that you're all of a sudden so interested in? Do you know him? Starting to get a bit annoyed, she shot him a mild glare. No, and even if I did, it won't be your business. Just answer the question, father. What would happen should I decide one day to go out on my own? Barakiel sighed and rubbed his forehead. Since you don't know any faction secrets that could potentially harm us, nothing would happen, though you'd be on your own, and without the protection of the Grigori, and if you one day were to cross us without it being intended, you would label yourself an enemy in the eyes of the faction. I won't be able to protect you. I can take care of myself, she grunted and crossed her arms again. I just don't understand you. Sayori ran a hand through her black locks. It is what it is, father. One day I'm not gonna be here anymore. Please don't make it out to be some kind of big deal. If I'm not going to get in trouble, it's only really a problem for you. Well, that verbal blow hurt. He couldn't deny that she was right. If that's your decision, I won't stop you. Good. I'm not going to leave right now, but in the future, as I've seen myself elsewhere. Still unable to let the thought go, Barakiel himself crossed his arms over his armor. I feel like you at least owe me to know whether or not it has to do with the boy. You don't look me in the eye in regard to him, so I know you weren't being truthful. You're my daughter, and I want to protect you. I feel like you could at least be honest with me because of that. I'm not leaving because of Naruto Grigori, so just stop asking about it. See, I'm looking you in the eyes right now. She finished and gave him a blank stare. Technically she wasn't lying. She didn't leave because of a boy whose name was Grigori. In fact, it was a completely different surname. It was just a coincidence that they shared the same first name. Fine, I'll go talk to Azazel about your idea. At least refrain from leaving until that mission has been put down or accepted. Barakiel finished and walked out of his daughter's room, closing the door behind him in the process. The raven-haired girl let out a loud and tired sigh as she slumped down in her bed, turning her head to stare out of the window as she fidgeted with the sleeves of her sweater. Now all she had to figure out was where he was. Seems like they had one more game of cat and mouse before things could be settled, and for once, the roles seemed to have been reversed with her being the one chasing him. 9L. The young Redeed let out a slow sigh as he stood on top of the water tower looking over Kuo. The rain dropping from the sky annoyed him a great deal as he folded out his wings and brought them over his head to shield himself from the rain. Pulling the hood of his jacket over his hair, he crossed his arms over his chest and settled for just staring out over the city for the time being. He hadn't felt like going back to Ria's place yet, ever since the incident with the fallen angels. Had stuck around in Kuo just to be on the safe side, plus had rather not deal with his father at the moment, while his mother was more understanding of him, had rather not get into another argument when his mind was currently elsewhere. At the same time, he couldn't stop thinking about Rias. It both hurt and angered him that the wedding ceremony was coming closer with each passing day. There was close to nothing he would give to be able to just kick down the doors to the Phoenix Manor and give Riser such an intense beating that they'd been forced to cancel the contract, even if he were going to be in serious trouble for it. He chuckled sourly at the thought. Even Rias didn't want that, so he was going to have to stay put for now at least. Despite how much annoyance it was, he'd stay put and wait until he could do something. The Redeed let out a grunt as he kicked a small pebble down the water tower and thought about it being time to fly home. However, the second he folded his wings out from above his head and was prepared to jump down from the ledge, his blood ran cold in his veins. A presence appeared behind him, which made him turn around in a heartbeat with his sword summoned to his hand. His blue-green eyes stared at the person who had just arrived. In front of him stood a tall man with black hair, golden bangs, and a black goatee, though the most eye-catching feature, and the thing that was also making him feel almost scared, were the 12 jet black feathered wings sprouted from the man's back, looking like a never-fading black. What do you want? Naruto asked as he took a step back, feeling his heel dangerously close to the edge of the water tower as his eyes stared into the man's violet ones. A sound chuckle traveled through the air as he put a hand on his hip. Am I to assume you know who I am? Given the number of wings you have, I have my guess, though I'm starting to feel like this is some kind of joke with how many fallen angels seem to be trespassing around here, Naruto commented and tightened his fingers around the blade's handle. The man rolled his eyes. Come on, put the pointy thing away and let's talk. We both know if this were a fight you'd already be dead. You didn't even see me coming before I let you. With an uncertain gaze, Naruto relaxed a bit and let his sword disappear into a magic circle. What do you want? He asked again. In case your guess was wrong, my name is Azazel, Governor General of the Grigori. In all honesty, it's a pleasure to meet you. I hear many great things about you, Azazel revealed, grinning a bit as he crossed his arms. Redeed nodded his head. Likewise, ain't every day I get to talk to a faction leader I'm not related to. He chuckled a bit. Azazel mimicked a small laugh. I can imagine. So, I know my little subordinates have caused some trouble and I'm here to work out a solution. They were out of line, and that's what that is. But I'd rather not have it become a trouble I can't solve without getting involved with Sursages. I assume you got an offer coming or something. Won't make sense for you to come in person otherwise, Naruto said with a raised brow. The fallen angel nodded. I most certainly do. You see, we have something in our possession that doesn't quite belong to us, which is apparently the whole objective of what caused this issue. He let out a slight snort. Yeah, your crows stole sacred gear from a nun here in our territory and continued to disrespect my sister and her peerage, almost killed some of them too. Look, I'm a man of my word and I don't particularly like hostility. I'm prepared to return turn the gear to the girl if she is somehow still alive, either that or let someone in your peerage or your sister's peerage take it, sound good? Azazel said simply, wiping some raindrops from the fabric of his maroon-colored coat. Naruto narrowed his eyes a bit, him not buying it. Oh? Why's that? Azazel wondered. The young man shrugged with a skeptical gaze. I'm not overly convinced that you're gonna sacrifice one of your own people just to give a girl of the church her sacred gear back. Azazel sighed. Look, as cold and cruel as it may sound, if this issue had been only about the girl we cold cared less about it. This is an issue I'd rather stay between the small groups and not the factions as a whole. Who knows what could potentially happen from stepping on the toes of not just one of Lucifer's siblings, but both. Rumor does say that he is quite fond of the two of you. So what offer is it that you're proposing? Naruto tried again, seeing a bit of logic in what the man was saying. A small grin lifted Azazel's lips as he spoke calmly. What would you say to have a new member in your peerage? Garideed's lone footsteps echoed through the empty streets of Kuo. His mind wandered off as he strolled through the night and in the direction of where his sister was currently residing within the town. While his mind had been occupied by his sister's arranged marriage and the return of his first love, today it was something else entirely. The things were all interconnected this time, and it was all because of that man, someone he couldn't decide whether to like or despise. Azazel. He was an odd fellow, with an even more odd and twisted kind of humor. Whether or not it was some kind of joke or game to him, he couldn't figure it out. Regardless, he couldn't deny that the man made sense. His eyes glimmered as they looked up at the moon. It was a full moon tonight. One of those nights when everything seemed brighter than usual. He felt as though there were something different about this particular night, but he wasn't sure what it could be. As he was occupied with his own thoughts, he suddenly stopped as someone called out to him from behind. Naruto blinked a couple of times before he stuck his hands inside his pockets and turned around. His blue-green eyes eventually settled on the face of a young man with brown hair, who was wearing that same uniform he'd seen at the Kuo Academy, who had come to know as the newest edition of Rias' peerage. Someone he wasn't totally sure whether or not to loathe or like yet. Generally, he seemed more than grateful that the nun had been reincarnated, even going as far as to drop down to the floor with his forehead against the floor panels, while he'd thank him repeatedly for convincing his sister to take a leap of faith. But on the other side, he was more than ready to poke his eyes out of his skull. The guy was more than perverted, and every time he had the audacity to practically worship his sister's bust lines in his presence, he had to be stopped by Rias before he'd accidentally evaporate him with his power of destruction spells. I do. Right? Naruto asked as he kept a polite smile on his face. The brown-haired boy quickly nodded his head. Yes sir, Lord. I'm not sure what to call you actually. Garideed had to blink out of sheer amusement at that. Naruto is fine, you don't need to call me by any fancy title. Oh, well alright then, the boy said out of surprise, yet still bowed his head slightly with an awkward scratch to the back of his head. As an awkward silence filled the streets again, Naruto fought the urge to let out a sigh as he asked, so was there anything you wanted to ask me, or were you just curious about my title? Issei quickly waved his hands. Oh no, it was more like how do I say it, I wanted to thank you again for everything you did for Asia. I know that Butchu was skeptical of it at first. You've already thanked me the other day though, and the day before that, Naruto mused out loud. Yeah but I mean, you saved her life, I don't think thanking you once or twice is enough to make up for it, the boy answered with a small laugh. Naruto let out a slow hum as he shrugged his shoulders a bit. Rias is a smart girl, she'd probably done it regardless, I just pushed her a bit in that direction, that's all, there is really no need to thank me. Despite the look of uncertainty on the student's face, he decided to not argue any further with a guy that could probably turn him into a pile of ashes. Not that he thought he would, but regardless, there was something else he had wanted to ask. There actually was something else. Oh? Ask away, though I'm on my way home so I'd prefer if it wasn't some favorite I'd take all day, Naruto responded with a raised brow. Issei quickly nodded. I was wondering about how you became that strong but you seemed to easily pass over the strongest of those fallen angels for you to fight when you volunteered, I'd guess that means you're pretty strong. Garideed's expression went blank as he let out a small sigh at that, so that's what this is about. He thought to himself before clearing his throat, I'm not going to lie to you, it takes a lot of hard work. Yeah, I figured that was the case, the brunette sweat dropped with a tired expression. Naruto just gave a slow nod. I've been training almost every day since the day my father deemed me ready to start learning about how to use my inherent abilities, though it was more my mother that taught me about it. I guess that's a bit irrelevant to your question. The student scratched the back of his head. It's just that I feel like a liability, you know. I always need someone to come and save me, whether it be Butchu or someone like Kiba and Kaneko. It just doesn't feel fair for them to always have to come to my rescue whenever I get myself into trouble. That whole fallen angel issue was probably my fault too. The Grimoire heir crossed his arms over his chest as he let out a quick sigh. Listen, you can't control the actions of others. The issue itself was never your fault. To begin with, they acted on their own intentions. Were you too weak to really do anything about it? Yeah, you were. I'm not going to be a cunt and lie about it to your face just to make you feel better, but the issue itself wasn't on you. While Issei had a defeated look on his face, he quickly tried to gather whatever courage he had left and smacked his own face, shaking his head, he looked back up. How do I become strong? I know you have answers, can you help me? Wouldn't it make more sense to go to your king and ask for help first? I know that you might think I have some answers for you, but while I'd love to help it's not really my place, Naruto asked as he scratched his cheek. Issei bowed his head down after that. I know I should be asking but as I said I feel like they've bailed me out enough as it is. I want to start paying them back for what they've done for me, and I don't want to do that by making them train me. It'd be like buying presents for your family with their own money. It doesn't seem right. The look of understanding spread on Naruto's face before he started chuckling, covering his face as he let out a couple of more laughs that both seemed to confuse but also slightly irritate the brunette. I guess you have a point. That's why I'd like your help. When something like this happens again, I want to be able to do more than just sit and whine on my ass. Issei sighed tiredly. The Grimoire cupped his chin thoughtfully. So let me get this right, you're asking me for training. If you just want me to pull out a spreadsheet with all the answers, then you got the wrong guy. I'm of the mindset that there are no shortcuts, either you do it or you don't. Issei gulped audibly as he looked nervously at the redeed. If that's what it's going to take, then yes, but I got a feeling I'm going to regret it. I wouldn't be doing it right if you didn't regret asking afterward, Naruto replied with a slight sadistic grin. That most likely make a certain Himejima claim him to be a man of culture. Thank you very much, sir. I hope not to disappoint you, Issei responded with another bow of his head. Grimacing at the title, Naruto waved his hand in the air. Yeah, drop the sir would ya? Come around to my sister's club tomorrow. We'll begin there, however, if I am to do this, there is one thing I'll need from you. Issei lifted his head with curiosity on his features. What is it? I don't have much, but if it's something I can do then name it. The dark and grim look spread across Naruto's face as he got an almost demonic smirk on his face. A red and black aura surrounded his being as he looked the frightened brunette right in the eyes. If I ever hear you make another perverted comment about especially my sister or anyone else, or I hear that you have while I wasn't there in person, I'll kill you. The new inheritor of the boosted gear took a step back with a gulp. I don't know if I can do that, you know. The comments just fly out of my mouth. I swear I only mean it as compliments. Then you'll learn to control yourself, because I won't accept it. Call me petty, but that's my one and only offer, Naruto said in a tone that meant it was the end of it, as he gave a carefree shrug. The Haidu let out a defeated sigh as he slowly nodded his head. Okay, I accept your terms. If it means I'll become stronger, then fine. I'll do it. Naruto clapped a few times with a satisfied grin. Very good, then it settled. Now run along. I want to get a good night's rest. Been way too long since I've been able to sleep properly without some kind of interruption. Oh, of course, sorry if I took up too much of your time. I'll be on my way now, and don't worry, I'll be there tomorrow as soon as classes end, I promise. The boy called out as he began jogging back in the direction he came from, throwing his hand up in a wave until he disappeared completely from sight. Iridid had to raise a brow at the sight. Doesn't he have wings? He chuckled a bit with a small shake of his head before folding out his own, jumping into the air as he flew toward the place Rias was currently living. 9L had never stopped being surprised whenever he got into Rias' home. Compared to a certain Citri who had her home here linked with her stronghold, Rias had settled for a classic apartment, even while he knew their parents had offered to build her a whole castle if the need should arise. Perhaps it was because she wanted to seem normal and be able to experience the Japanese culture properly. Well, he knew it was part of the reason, but he was unsure if it was the whole reason. A loud yawn escaped him as he hung up his jacket inside his room, well, the guest room he was borrowing at least. He pulled off his shirt and threw it inside the washing bin he had in the corner of the room, and soon let his pants follow, though before he left, he grabbed some clean clothes and got ready to take what deemed a well-deserved shower. As he opened his door he peeked out and looked up and down the hallway, making sure the coast was clear, so he wouldn't give Rias a jump scare with his partial nudity. Once he'd seen there was no one, he skipped out and closed the door behind him. When he entered the bathroom, he stretched and put down his clothes. Discarding his boxers and socks in the corner of the room, he flicked on the light and turned on the shower, waiting for the steam to start rising above the shower curtain before he entered, and let a pleased sigh escape his lips as the warm water started raining down over his bare body. He placed his palms against the wall as he leaned down his head to let the water run through his red locks, closing his eyes as he just let his mind blank out, to the point he didn't even hear the door open and close. Not even the sound of clothes discarded seemed to catch his attention, but when the light seemed to brighten inside the shower from the curtain being pulled open, he opened his eyes with a confused look on his face until he felt a hand on the upper part of his back. He did a small jump and was about to turn his head and elbow whoever had snuck up on him in the face, but when he heard the voice of who was there he visibly relaxed again. Could you move over a few feet? You're filling up the entire space. Naruto raised a brow as he fought the urge to turn around. What are you doing in here, Rias? If you wanted to take a shower first, you cold just told me, he chuckled sheepishly. The crimson-haired beauty let out a few giggles. Is it so strange? We used to bathe together. Yeah, when we were kids. We're pretty much adults now, don't you think it's a bit weird? He mouthed with his lips in a thin line. Rias shook her head as she kept a small smile on her face. No, it always brought me a sense of comfort, and I didn't really want to be alone tonight. I know it's a cliché, but my thoughts always seem to get the better of me at night. As he heard that, Naruto gulped and slowly turned around to face her. When his eyes landed on her, he couldn't stop himself from looking her up and down, seeing everything from her smooth skin to her generously sized chest in the dimmed light. Before he looked back up at her eyes, clearing his throat, he scratched the back of his head. Is something wrong? The Grigori heiress gave a small smile as her cheeks heated a bit up from the wandering glance of her sibling, not commenting on it as she bit the inside of her cheek. I guess. Want to tell me what's wrong then? He asked next, tilting his head down to look into her eyes again. She let out a soft sigh as she gave a slow nod of her head. It's just that I don't know what to do. I feel like I'm doing something wrong, like I'm not fit to be king of my peerage or the heiress of our house. No matter what I do, it always feels like I need to depend on you or Zetches to do things for me. Naruto raised an outraged brow. Now what kind of nonsense is that? I've been here for a handful of days, and you've been more than fine on your own all this time. Where is all of this coming from? Is it really nonsense though? I feel like I'm some kind of bad luck charm. Look at the mess that happened here. If I had been a better king, then perhaps this mess with the fallen cold been avoided. Maybe I wouldn't have been married off to Riser. I don't know what to do anymore, she admitted as she looked back down at her feet, splashing a bit of the water around the drain with her toes to keep herself distracted. The younger Rias shook his head a bit with a small roll of his eyes. As he reached forward, he cupped her cheeks and tilted her head up, staring down at her with a serious gaze. You're not a bad luck charm. Do you want me to name all the times it's been the exact opposite? Everyone in your peerage is alive and well because of you. You've saved them, Rias. If anything, you're a good luck charm, so don't put yourself down like this. Rias gave a soft smile as she reached up and grabbed his hands on her face, feeling her cheeks heat up a bit more as she gave a quick laugh. I'm sure the situation would have been handled much smoother if it'd been you or Zetches though. Naruto had a deadpan expression as she removed one hand from her face to flick his finger against her forehead. Stupid. She let out a small yelp as she rubbed her face. What was that for? For being an idiot. You're your own person, Rias. You don't need to compare yourself to anyone, not me, and not Sirzich's. You've done an amazing job, and I'm very proud of my big sister, he spoke out truthfully as he gave her a bright smile. No amount of words could begin to describe the look of shock and affection on the red-haired girl's face as she giggled at him. I thought I was supposed to be the older sibling, yet you seem to be the one that has to comfort me all the time. The former blonde rolled his eyes. Comes from the girl who had to take care of my passed out ass. Keep sprouting nonsense. I'll flick your forehead again. Don't do that. Fine, I'll behave. Just keep what I say in mind. You have nothing to prove to me or anyone else. I'm sure that everyone in your peerage agrees, especially your newest addition. He even asked me for help to train him, so he could please the rest of you. Don't worry, you're doing great. Naruto smiled as he leaned his forehead and pressed a small peck against her forehead. The slightly flustered expression crept onto Ria's features as she leaned forward with her arms stretched out, her chest pressed up against his torso, as she wrapped him up in a tight hug, with her shoulder resting in the crook of his neck. Thank you. Naruto had a look of surprise on his face as he felt his sister's very naked breasts press up against his chest. He cleared his throat as he looked down at her. You do know I can feel everything, right? So? She asked and rolled her eyes a bit, just clutching him a bit tighter. The younger Grigori had to sigh at his sister's antics, but wrapped his arms around her nonetheless, feeling her soft body wrapped up around him. He rested his cheek down against the top of her head. Well, he wouldn't openly admit it, because she was his sister, it felt good. There was no doubt in his mind that Rias was a very beautiful good, and had a great body, and part of him felt like he was only letting himself feel that because he had a former life, and she had first become his sister after his death and his reincarnation. It was probably just some kind of way to cope with it all, and he knew that, while clans in the elemental nations had practiced less than decent acts with their families to keep bloodlines pure, he did feel a small amount of guilt for enjoying this. Yet, with how happy she seemed, he found himself caring less and less by the second, and he did enjoy it himself, so why should he pretend that he didn't? They weren't saying anything, so the only person he'd be lying to would be himself, and he wasn't a fan of liars, to begin with. I really don't want to get married to Riser. Naruto hummed as he opened his eyes again. Rias shook her head a bit. You heard me, Hess not the one I want to marry. He gave a slow nod in response, though at the mention of someone else she wanted to marry a mix of curiosity, but also a tad bit of jealousy coursed through his veins. I did hear you, and I know that you don't want to. I just don't know why you brought it up, that's all. I'm not going to let it happen though, please believe me, I'd rather punch his face in than see you unhappy. Who do you want to marry though? I know, but I don't know if there is anything we can do. Our father seems to insist, and a girl has her secrets, she sighed, followed by a quick giggle as she drew small circles with her finger on his naked back. Naruto quickly shook his head and pulled back, placing his hands on the girl's shoulders. Just trust me on this, no matter what, you aren't getting married to Riser. No one should be able to force you to do something like that, you should be able to choose yourself. Thank you, really, it means a lot to me, just knowing that you're on my side is helping. She smiled and pulled back herself, patting him on the shoulder. Now turn around, we're wasting a lot of water, it'll wash your back. The taller Redeed rolled his blue-green eyes as he turned around, doing a small jump as he felt his sister's hands begin to rub some soap up and down his back. It felt a bit cold after his body had been heated up by the water, but it was still a pleasant feeling, a bit like getting a message. Look at me, getting a massage from a pretty girl, he teased as he chuckled. Rias shook her head and took some soap and smacked him on the back of his head. It's not for free, I expect you to return the favor, I swear. You can be so good for a few minutes and then switch back to being a knucklehead a minute later. With a non-caring shrug, Naruto looked over his shoulder. Oh come on, you know you love me. Luckily for you, I do, she smirked and gave him another smack to the head. Your turn, I want to get some sleep soon, been a long day, and I feel like tomorrow is going to be even worse. How so? Naruto asked out of curiosity as he turned around and spun his finger in front of Rias to signal for her to turn her back so he could return the favor for her. Rias hummed softly, I don't know, just school and all, got to teach Issei how to be more productive with his contracts too, also need to go to the familiar forest with him and Asia soon, seems like so much to do and so little time to do it, she said as she turned around, her body doing small jiggles with each small step. Naruto poured some soap into his hands as he got ready to watch her back, but he placed them on her shoulders. His vision started to wander south and his gaze remained there for quite a bit. He shook his head after a bit as he started to wash her back, rubbing his hands up and down the upper and lower part of her back, along her spine, and up her sides. He could feel his fingertips slightly gracing the side of her chest, but tried to pay it no mind as he finished up. As he did so, he could hear Rias occasionally let out a pleased sigh, such a sweet sound that encouraged him to keep giving some of the more sensitive parts of her a bit of a rub, which she leaned into. I swear the pervy sage haunts me from beyond the grave and from another universe, he sweat-dropped and let out a sigh so low that she couldn't hear it from the water. Though what he couldn't see was a small frown present on Ria's face as less than decent thoughts began to fill her mind. Their current situation reminded her that there was still one thing she wanted to do, or rather, that she had to do before it was too late. Before it was too late and before she'd be married to Riser if things didn't go their way in the end. 9L. Sayori let her dark eyes wander over the layout of the Nephilim Institute as she walked down the pretty barren hallways. Swung over her shoulder was a small bag filled with what she'd call the essentials she'd potentially need. A gentle sigh left her lips as she listened to each of her footsteps, sending echoes bouncing off the walls around her. It wasn't her favorite idea to leave like this, but at the same she'd rather not face the potentially hurt expression, third beyond her father's face. After everything she'd been through and done, it was the last thing she wanted to do. She didn't find any satisfaction in hurting people like that, especially now that had done everything he could to raise her properly as a father should, had given her a home and a future within a pretty powerful organization, and perhaps as a potential leader within the Grigori. In hers, and she just always knew that was more his dream than her own. For the last many years, the mere concept of having a new plan seemed a bit foolish to her. She felt like she'd wasted that chance when she'd been responsible for the death of someone very dear to her and extremely close to her heart, so she always felt that it served well as a punishment, at least until she found that he was alive, just like her, had been shoved into this new reality. It gave her a new drive to try and make up for the countless mistakes she'd done and all the pain she had caused him. Despite how good the Grigori had been to her, there wasn't really much doubt in her mind about where her place should be, where her real place was. Though as she exited through what she'd call the main entrance to the institute, her eyes widened a tad bit in surprise at the sight of her father sitting at the bottom steps of the stairs leading up to the doors. I figured you'd be asleep by this time, she called out and walked down toward him slowly. Erekiel lifted his head with a slight smile on his face. Well, I figured I should be awake to see my youngest daughter off. Sayori chewed a bit on the inside of her cheek. I didn't want you to find out like this. He let out a slight grunt. I bet you'd prefer that I didn't find out at all. It's not that, I just didn't want to disappoint you. Well, I probably could avoid that regardless, but it'd have been easier not to witness it, she mumbled out and adjusted a few of her dark locks. The large man stood up from his seated place and shook his head at her. I knew that it'd happen eventually, so don't worry, and I also know it's because of the Grimory boy. Azazel had the same suspicions. You don't have to tell me why or how he is connected, but I hope that you've thought it through at least. I have, she quickly responded. Erekiel gave a satisfied nod. Then that's all I could ask for. I am going to assume that'll mean you'll be seeing more of your sister very soon. Sayori stopped a bit in her tracks at that mention. It was a bit of a touchy subject between them. They often tried to avoid the subject of her mother or sister, But it seemed like tonight was going to be different. She is the queen of Naruto Gremori's sister, so yes, I'd imagine we're forced to interact more in the near future. Ah well, go easy on her, I know that, well, it hasn't always been easy to get along within this family, Brachial said with a reluctant sigh. The dark-haired girl nodded her head. I wasn't going to torment her, however, I'm certain she'll be reluctant to interact with me, as you said, the relationships have been rather strained ever since mother died. Brachial nodded, don't blame her for it, it caused her a lot of hardship to go through. I don't blame her, it wasn't her fault. The man gave another satisfied nod, that's good to hear, I know your tone was different when you were younger. Sayori let out a quick chuckle, I was a kid back then, and I know better now than to try and force accusations on her. Family is as important as it is difficult. I'd reckon no healthy family would be problem-free, contrary to popular belief. Would you let me know how she is doing? Not all the time, just once in a while, despite our current relationship, I'm still her father. She nodded, of course. A breath of relief escaped the large man's lips as he folded his arms behind his back. Azazel has agreed to let you go from the Grigori, however, we need you to do one more thing first. What's that? Sayori asked curiously. Brachial grunted, you managed to convince Azazel. Your little idea of how things should play out in regard to the issue that happened within Kuo. He event went ahead and met with the boy. Despite how Wed talked about you being the messenger, he hasn't given us a response yet, but if that's where you're going, Wed like to know his answer to the proposal. To say that she was surprised would be an understatement, but she gave a reluctant nod of her head. Sure, is Rainer up to date? Sure am. The dark-haired girl raised a brow as she turned around, letting her eyes land on the form of the skimpy-clad woman, leaning against one of the support beams, her arms crossed under her large chest as she stood with a tired expression on her face. Sayori gave her a blank stare as she mimicked the action of crossing her arms, and Yauv accepted it. The woman let out a sigh, not like I have much of a choice, and if Azazel thinks it's a good idea, I guess it is what it is the damn devil boy really that special? If special means being able to vaporize you in a second, then yes, Sayori replied dryly. Rainer rolled her eyes, is it true that he can make me stronger? The younger girl shrugged her shoulders, if the peerage systems work the way that we think, then yes, your strengths and attributes would be boosted in tune with how strong he is. I guess it isn't too bad then, she sighed, but refused to look the younger girl in the eyes. Brachial grunted at the exchange, he still has to accept the offer first, and I expect that Yao'll behave as a former member of the Grigori. This is the wish of both Azazel and the rest of us, so you better not dirty our name. The woman audibly gulped with a slow nod, I'll do my best, sir. Good, Brachial responded before turning his attention back to his daughter. Well, I know Yao'll be part of a different faction. I hope and expect that Yao'll keep her in line. She doesn't respect the Grimory heir yet, but she respects you. Sayori nodded without having to think twice about it. I'll keep her in line. She knows what happens if she decides to play games around me, she replied and shot a glance back at Rainer, who looked visibly shaken at the comment. You don't need to talk like him, not here, I get it alright. I fucked up, big deal, but I'm going to make up for it. At least I'm not going to be dead if I agreed to this, Rainer groaned out. It was clear that the woman was upset, but since she was determined to be of use to the Grigori, it appeared as she'd at least accepted her fate. What they could only hope was that she'd learn to be determined to be of use to someone else. Brachial scratched his beard thoughtfully. I wish you luck, daughter. I guess this is where we say goodbye for now. Don't look that somber. We'll see each other again soon enough, Sayori smirked as she reached over to give her father a quick hug, which the man accepted. As they parted, Sayori decided to send one last look in the direction of Rainer. I had thought Yao'd be much more verbal about this arrangement. Oh, she was, but one small glare from Azazel and she found her place again. Brachial cut in. The woman shrugged, as much as I despise devils, if it's what it takes, I'll do it. Sayori gave her a small glare. I'm quite unsure of why and how you came to the conclusion that devils were to be despised. There are people just like us, they just have different genes and living standards. In reality, we're all quite similar. The key difference was just that you fell from heaven. Rainer seemed to be a bit shocked, but voiced no further opinion before she retreated back inside the institute, leaving the father and daughter duo behind. Seems like you might hit the nail on the head. I bet she didn't expect that, Brachial mused. The girl chuckled, if she first figured that out now, I fear Naruto has a lot of headaches in the future, which I bet Yao'll help him with, whatever the relationship is between you two. I do wish you luck, daughter, be safe out there, and remember Yao'll always have a place here, well, unless you decide to make an enemy of the Grigori, but I know you better than that, Brachial finished, a small humor-filled grin on his rough features. Sayori rolled her eyes as she folded out her 6 wings. I'll see you around, father, don't get too bored without me, she finished, before ascending to the heavens, flying over the institute, leaving behind the Grigori for the time being. Though as Brachial stood there, a slight look of determination crept onto his features as he flew off himself. There was a person he had to meet to be on the safe side. A meeting set up by Azazel himself, just to ease the worries of a father. Naruto sat on boulder by a river in the northern forests of Kuo, as he rested his chin in the palm of his hand. He idly tapped his jaw as he mentally counted the seconds passing by in his head. Though as a change in the wind occurred behind him, he took a quick breath. With the number of fallen angels I'm meeting these days I'm not sure whether or not to count myself lucky or unlucky. He chuckled as he stood up. As he turned around, he came face to face with a man that looked very different from what he'd imagined. Like seriously, this enormous person, he couldn't begin to fathom how he could be the father of not just a kiddo but someone else as well. What he came face to face with was a man that had the appearance of a middle-aged, gruff-looking fallen angel with black hair, a matching beard, and a large body. The expression on his face was blank, yet seemingly his eyes were trying to stare directly into his soul. What is that supposed to mean? Naruto quickly waved his hands in front of him in a defensive manner. Nothing really, it's just that I've met more fallen angels in the last 2 weeks than I have in my entire life combined, that's all. I see, the man replied, his features slightly easing. The redeed scratched the back of his head. So I heard that Azazel said you wanted to meet me for some reason. I'm not really sure why, but I assume it has something to do with that offer he proposed. The man gave a slight nod, partially. My name is Barakiel, as you may or may not know already. My daughters are Akeno Himejima and Sayori Himejima. I've met both before. Naruto nodded in return. Yeah, that's right. I wanted to see what kind of person you were with my own eyes. Rainer is, depending on your answer, going to end up in your care, and for reasons my daughter has decided not to share with me, she has left the Grigori. We all know it's because of you, but none of us can place a reason as to why, though since it's my daughter's wish, I'll not pry, but as a father, I still wanted to take a look at the man who seemingly was the influence behind her choice, Barakiel revealed. The Grimory heir took a step back. She left the Grigori. Damn, I didn't expect that. I can't really say why. To be honest, everything feels a bit like a blur these days. Had I known that so much would happen here, I might stayed back in the underworld, he half joked, which seemed to bring a rough chuckle out of the man. I can imagine it's not easy being an heir. You seem like a decent enough young man, so should my daughter decide to join you, I'll not stop her. Not that I would have regardless, I don't want to control her. Naruto just nodded his head in understanding. Don't worry, you're her dad. It's completely normal to be worried and cautious. It's all pretty weird around here. I bet my old man would also be rubbing his head out of confusion if I said I wanted to do something like that. I'm glad to hear that you understand. May I ask whether or not you've thought more about the offer proposed by our Governor General? Barakiel asked next. The redeed shook his head. Not really, no. There is a lot going on at the moment. I got a lot on my mind, but I promise I'll have an answer soon enough. It's just a hard pill to swallow. I feel like I'm the one determining whether or not someone has to die. The 10-winged man shook his head. Not really. If you were to accept the offer, it'd be more like a sign of goodwill. Were you to refuse, she won't be executed. However, you won't get the Holy Sister's sacred gear back, and the issue would leave behind potential yet minor strain between the factions. It's at least good to hear everyone wants to find a peaceful solution. Naruto chuckled with a deadpan expression. Barakiel nodded. Azazel and the Grigori have no interest in war. Quite on the contrary. Well, this issue alone won't start a new war. We'd rather prevent anything that could begin the escalations that lead to bloodshed. Naruto hummed as he fidgeted with the sleeve of his jacket. Yeah, he said as much. So what's the woman like? I won't lie to you, Rainer will be a handful to deal with. She has a natural distaste for devils. But if my daughter will end up near you as we think she will, I have no doubt she'll help you keep Rainer in check, Barakiel explained. But the thoughtful expression, Naruto chuckled. I guess that means she is respected. I half expected as much. She is my daughter, but even if she wasn't, she made it that way. If anyone tried to mess with her even during her younger days, she quickly put a stop to it through her own efforts and willpower. Naruto couldn't help but smile at that. It sounded exactly like the Sayori that he used to know, and it gave him a familiar sense of happiness spreading throughout his body. If she really was like the girl he remembered and loved, then perhaps there was hope. And if Shed really left the Grigori because of him, he didn't want to get his hopes too much up, but the wave of excitement and impatience flooding him were too noticeable to plainly ignore. I won't take up any more of your time. I simply wish to have a word with you before my daughter arrived here, Barakiel revealed. Naruto blinked at that. She is already on her way here. Barakiel shrugged. Not here specifically, but she is looking for you, unless she hurries. I'd imagine it'd be around half an hour before she is within the town. I do hope that if she decides to join you, y'all treat her with respect. I know the rumor about the peerages of the Grimory, that you treat each other like family. I hope that is true. But the determined look, Naruto nodded. You don't have to worry at all. If she should decide that, then I'll treat her well, just like you guys. I don't want to start any hostility. In all honesty, I just want us all to get along. A small smile lifted Barakiel's lips as he prepared to leave. I'm glad to hear that. I bet kid you luck, my daughter can be a bit of a handful. I think y'all manage though. You don't have to tell me I chased her around for years. He internally sweat dropped as he watched the large man fly off into the distance. Well, that wasn't strange at all. He mouthed out with a breath of relief as he slumped back down against a boulder. The worry left his body as he leaned back to stare up at the star-filled sky above him. Many questions filled his mind again, but he couldn't help but smile. Had wanted to talk to her again for so long, even if it was just for a mere moment, and now she was on her way here. While he was worried, he was also ecstatic. The only thing stopping him from sprinting out into the town of Kuo to meet him was the amount of worry he had. There was no telling what Rias or Akeno's reactions were going to be. Especially the latter had a very strained relationship in view of her family and had rather not be a problem for them or cause any complications because of actions that had taken. But no matter how much he thought about it, he knew that the only way to experience what the future had in store was to face it. 9L. Ria's footsteps crunched into the gravel beneath her feet as she rubbed the bridge of her nose. This evening had been like most others. She had hung out in their clubroom as the rest of the peerages was out working with their contracts and gathering new ones, at least until her familiar came to her with some disturbing news, which was the reason an expression of unease was present on her face as she walked toward the church where the incident with the fallen angels had occurred with her queen in tow. Not that Akeno was faring any better, she looked torn between being nervous and angry. And Rias couldn't find it in her heart to blame her. It wasn't every day that something like this happened. In fact, if Akeno hadn't been there when her familiar arrived, she'd probably have kept this meeting a secret for a bit, though since she was there she had quite heavily insisted on coming along just to be on the safe side of everything. Akeno, are you sure that coming along was a good idea? Rias eventually asked in a quiet tone. The dark-haired girl just gave a swift nod as she tried looking as determined as possible. Absolutely, Rias, the last time my sister was in time, a lot of bad things happened. I'm not letting you go in there alone. As your queen, it would be beneath me to let something like that occur just because of my personal feelings. While Rias wanted to argue that she was coming along because of those exact personal feelings, she decided against it for the time being. Upsetting her best friend was the last thing she wanted to do at the moment, even if she had a good point. If you insist, Rias sighed and walked up to the large doors leading inside the church, walking straight through the entrance as the doors were open. The Grigori Harris eyes locked onto the side of a familiar black-haired girl that was sitting at the edge of the altar. Her fingers interlocked as her dark eyes followed them. I must say that I'm surprised to find out you wanted to meet, given that the last time you were here, someone died. Sayuri stood up from her seated position and bowed her head down slightly. I'm sorry about the death of the holy sister, it wasn't within my intention. Then what was your intention? Akeno chimed in, her violet eyes locked on her younger sister with a stern gaze. Akeno Rias internally frowned as she gazed toward her queen's strained posture. The younger Himejima frowned a bit at the tone. I was merely tasked with bringing our strays home alive. I'm sure you understand what a chain of command means. Had I forsaken my orders, I could been branded a traitor. Akeno snorted, as if, Yaor his daughter, had not let anyone harm as much as a hair on your pretty face. Sayuri let out a soft sigh, he'd go to the same lengths for you. I just wish y'd see it that way. Don't make me laugh. Rias clenched her eyes shut for a second. Hostilities aside, what is it that you want? Better speak fast, because you're not welcome here, Akeno added through gritted teeth. The Grigori turned her head to her queen. Akeno, take a breather, I'll handle this conversation. I think you should go take a bit of air. The girl seemed to want to protest, but stopped herself before she could and turned around and walked out of the church with haste in her steps, closing the doors behind her, though staying close enough in case a battle would occur. As the doors shut close, Rias turned her head back to her queen's little sister. I'll ask again now that we're alone, what is it that you want? You may not believe me, but I do not want any hostility. I merely wish for the chance to speak to your brother, that's all, Sayuri answered without skipping a beat. Rias crossed her arms beneath her chest. Why should I allow that? The dark-haired girl raised a brow. I just assured you I mean no harm, I just want to talk to him. That's the funny part because the last time the two of you were left alone, both of you were passed out on the ground. My brother was in so much turmoil, such a nightmare-fueled sleep, I could barely stand it, Rias voiced loudly enough for her to hear. As expected, a solemn look spread on Sayuri's features as she clenched her fist tightly. I once again apologize, I did not wish to cause anyone harm. Rias let out a soft sigh, yet, you did cause harm, fortunately, my brother has a very big heart and convinced me to see past my doubts and use one of my pieces on Asia, so before I make a decision, I want to know what your deal is, what happened between you and my brother. I don't know, I'm being honest, one minute we were fighting, and the other I passed out. It's only recently that I learned that he was knocked out as well, Sayuri explained, keeping eye contact to try and show that she was being truthful. The redeed bit the inside of her cheek. It is hard to believe. Do you think he'll believe that a potential third party was there and left after knocking you both out? Not bothering doing any of you harm despite putting in enough effort to render you unconscious. Sayuri let out a grunt as she crossed her arms. At this point, I'm starting not to care what you believe. I've been respectful so far, because of my opinion of your brother, but even that along with the offer extended by the Grigori still doesn't seem to be enough to satisfy you. What offer by the Grigori? This is the first I hear of it, Rias snorted. The dark-haired girl raised a brow. You mean to tell me that he hasn't told you? Well, allow me to enlighten you then. Before I left the Grigori service, I was part of a talk. An offer was extended to your brother, a formal apology for what some of ours had done. Rias narrowed her eyes a bit at that. What was the offer? Sayuri shrugged non-caringly. The Governor-General doesn't want any more bad blood between the factions, so he extended an offer to someone that he thought would listen. The Holy Sister's gear would be returned to her, and he'd have the chance to get a member for his peerage. A member? You mean to tell me that the Grigori is just giving away one of their own? Rias questioned with doubt. Sayuri sighed, it's either that or death. You know very well what the price is for extracting a sacred gear. Iridide's eyes widened in shock. The Grigori is offering Rainer of all people to join my brother. I'm not sure whether or not to laugh or I don't even know. Do you not remember the damage she did here? She is practically the fuel for the nightmares that my peerage has had the past few weeks. And the Grigori thought that a fitting punishment that didn't mean her execution was for her to be given up to the very same people. It's an ancient deal. It's called slavery, though the only reason the deal was brought up in the first place is that even the Grigori has heard of how the Grimory treats their peerages like family, Sayuri argued with a soft sigh. Rias bit the corner of her lip as she awkwardly tapped her foot against the church's floor. Why won't Naruto tell me of this? Sayuri shrugged, because it's a big decision. I wouldn't blame him if I were you. He got to choose whether or not to sentence someone to their death, and if he doesn't, he'll be known as the guy that let the girl that caused this incident live among you. Either way, he loses. Some apology from the Grigori, Rias snorted as she clenched her fists, not liking the idea one bit. If someone forced her brother to do something like that, she'd want their head on a spike. The dark-haired girl gave the Grimory a look. No amount of money or anything similar would been able to serve as a good apology. Not only is Azazel giving the girl back what was rightfully hers, but Hess also giving up the person that was responsible. It isn't the Grigori's fault that the removal of a sacred gear means certain death. I guess we owe that to the big guy. You mean God? Sayuri shrugged again. Isn't he the one that created this twisted system? You get a supposed gift, something that people will hunt you for, people want to steal it, and if they succeed you die. I'd rather call it a curse. And here I thought I wouldn't agree with you on anything. I'm surprised. A slight smirk seemed to lift Sayuri's lips as she blinked slowly. So what will it be? Can you show me the way to your brother? I'm supposed to be the messenger, so when he has an answer, he'll pass it along to the Grigori. Rias let out a grunt as she shrugged at the other girl. I would love to help, but my brother is as unpredictable as the wind. I don't keep track of where he is going. Sayuri's lips curled upward again. More and more seemed to indicate this was indeed a Naruto. There wasn't much that indicated anything else really, but everything seemed too good to be true at the moment. Some would ask if she was crazy, leaving her home behind to chase someone who perhaps wasn't even the person she thought he was. She didn't care though, the chance of it being him was enough for her, so she won't let anyone try and convince her otherwise until Head looked her in the eye and claimed he had no clue who she was. She'd continued to believe that the red-haired man was indeed her knucklehead. I see, will you allow me to go look for him myself then? Sayuri asked. Rias looked her over. Given that you've shown no signs of wanting to aggravate me or the House of Grimory, I'm tempted to say yes. However, the fact that the last time fallen angels came around here there was so much trouble, I don't know, why should I? Sayuri returned the glance yet didn't seem to be the least bothered. You don't have many reasons to let me, but plenty of reasons as to why you should say no. I won't blame you for your answer, but I'll find him, with or without permission. I'd just rather that I do it the proper way. And you think I'd let you? You're in Grimory territory. If the Grigori already extended this apology, I'm not sure it'd be a clever decision. The fallen angel chuckled a bit. As I said before, I'm no longer part of the Grigori, so my actions are those of my own. We both know I'm the strongest of the two of us, and with that, I mean no disrespect. I want to talk to your brother. I'd prefer not to insult his sister to do so. The crimson-haired girl let out a brief breath. You have until tomorrow morning. Discuss your business with him, and leave. And trust me, if you're still here, it won't be me that you have to worry about. Rias finished and turned around as she began to leave. Her footsteps echoed throughout the church until the large doors creaked open, leaving the dark-haired girl behind. Sayuri gave a slight smile. She knew this was merely theatrics. As the heiress to a house of the 72 pillars, showing weakness would potentially be a bad thing. She was right to do so, and for that, she won't blame her. However, she doubted that her trip here would be done by tomorrow. If anything, it had just begun. The Himejima began to leave as well after she figured enough minutes had passed. She'd rather not walk outside, just to be forced to endure another another conversation with the Grigori and her sister. Not that she didn't love her sister, because she did, however, there was too much bad blood between them at the moment. Something she hoped she could fix in the future, but at the moment it didn't seem likely. As he walked out of the church and closed the door behind her, she began walking down through the woods, preparing to fly off as soon as she was far enough away, but she coldly dismissed the feeling of someone following her. "You might as well come out now," she called out as she stopped walking and turned around. The moonlight that was lighting up the path she was standing on soon revealed someone else as well. The dim light of the moon reflected off her dark locks as a pair of violet eyes stared into her own black ones. Sayori felt a bit of unease creep up inside of her as she grasped the sleeve of her shirt. "I didn't think you'd want to talk to me, Akeno." The dark-haired girl kept staring at her for a while before she finally responded, "Neither did I." The younger sister stared at Akeno as she thought about what to say. Despite having lived a past life, there was no doubt in her mind that she truly did love her new sibling, regardless of past or present. There was no arguing against the fact that they had the same blood flowing through their veins. "I'm sorry," she eventually mouthed out. Akeno looked down to the side. "Why?" A bit surprised about actually getting an answer, Sayori responded, "You're in pain, I never meant to haunt you." "Why would you be haunting me? I'm free now." Sayori sighed, "So you mean to tell me that the reason you said I'm not welcome isn't because of who I am?" The quick chuckle escaped Akeno's lips. "If I said yes, it'd be a lie." "Do you hate me?" Sayori asked hesitantly. It wasn't a question out of spite, merely out of curiosity. She had once hated her older brother passionately, and now the roles had been reversed. In this life, it seemed like it was her turn to be hated. The only difference was that she didn't have a brother this time, only a sister that'd been wronged. She didn't blame Akeno if she did hate her. She more than anyone understood what hatred could do to a person and what kind of things it could make you do just to make those clouded thoughts disappear from your head. Akeno looked shocked at the question. Despite common belief, it wasn't a thought she had had before. Sure, there were certain thoughts about her father and her opinion of him, but hating her sister? She hadn't thought of it like that before. She bit the inside of her cheek as she gathered her hands in front of her. "No, I don't hate you." If she wasn't surprised before, Sayori was quite flabbergasted now. "You don't? I thought all along that you despised the very sight of me." "You won't be wrong, I won't deny that seeing your face makes me angry," Akeno started, gazing over at the slightly crestfallen expression of her younger sister before finishing. "But I won't deny either that seeing it also brings me joy." Sayori looked into her sister's eyes at that. "I don't understand." A small shrug lifted Akeno's shoulders. "Ria's brother once told me something. I'm not particularly fond of men, but he said to me that while my prejudice was to be expected, it should make me put the blame where it doesn't belong. Hess the first man I've come to like after our family's incident." "I'm not a man though," Sayori mumbled with a raised brow, though a slight bit of jealousy also seemed to creep up inside her. Akeno let out a quick chuckle. "I know, but it's because of him that I've come to understand one person doesn't describe the whole group. It's no secret, I loathe father, but you're not him, so while seeing a face that reminds me so much of our mom, I can't hate you." "Do you know him well?" "Naruto Grigori, I mean," Sayori asked in all but a whisper. Unsure of where this conversation would go, Akeno just gave a slight nod of her head. "Rias was the one that saved my life. When I joined her, I met her little brother. Truth be told, I loathed the very sight of him. I wanted nothing more than for him to leave me alone. However, he is a persistent one." Sayori let out a few giggles. This indeed sounded much like the Naruto she used to know. "He won't leave you be." Despite being confused about her sister's laughing, she decided to ignore it. "Oh no, despite how much I blatantly bullied him, he was always there the next day, with that stupid grin on his face, as he told me the joke of the century. Gosh, I hated him for that." "I see," Sayori answered with a slight smile. Akeno let out a brief sigh. "Why are you so interested in him?" "I listened in on your conversation. Well, I was mad, and still am. Rias is my king. I won't leave her side just because of this. As I said him to be a messenger before I'm free of the Grigori completely. I never meant to stay there my entire life, but I'll admit that he is interesting. I want to know as much as anyone else why I passed out in our fight," she answered. "Well, a bit of it was partially a lie, there was also a bit of truth to it." Akeno gave a slow nod of her head. "Rias gave you until tomorrow to meet him. He'll leave now, so I won't take up more of your time." The dark-haired girl finished as she turned around and began to walk away. A bit surprised about the sudden leaving, Sayori lifted her head to stare at the back of her sister. "Can we talk again soon?" The older sister paused in her steps as she clenched her eyes tight for a second, turning her head in Sayori's direction, but not looking at her. "Well, I don't hate you. I still feel weird talking to you. I took a leap of faith coming here. Despite what I feel, you're still my sister. I felt like you deserved as much. I appreciate the chance. I'll wait for you if you want to talk again." Akeno couldn't help but give the smallest of smiles. "Go to the nearby waterfalls. He likes to hang around there for some reason." She finished and began walking away in direction of which she came until she was no longer in sight. Though what she failed to notice was how Sayori had visibly stiffened at the mention of where he liked to be. Waterfalls. She let out a few soft giggles. The irony. A smile lifted her lips a bit as she folded out her wings and leaped into the air. She hadn't been to Kuo before the other day, so she'd have to find a map, but the thought still occupied her mind. It was truly ironic that the person she'd longed to find the most had always been in the exact place she left him, at a waterfall. 9L. Blue-green eyes watched over the water as it fell in front of his eyes. As a soft sigh escaped his lips, he ran a hand through his crimson locks as he sat down on the grass field by the river and rested his elbows on top of his knees as he simply kept watching the waterfall in front of him. The morning sun was starting to rise behind him. Last night had been without any sleep, so had found himself here again. Whenever he visited the human world, as some would call it, he often came by this place. There were of course some similar places down in the underworld, but none of them was quite as remarkable as this one, probably because this one reminded him of his past life and the person he used to be. However, the lack of the two great statues of Madara Uchiha and Hashirama Senju were lacking. Had there been something like those monuments, he'd probably have bought a house nearby. It easily reminded him of his time as Naruto Uzumaki. Some would say that the saying "gone but not forgotten" would be the ideal phrase for his situation, but he'd disagree. He was neither gone nor forgotten. In fact, he'd argue that he was still the same person, just a different variant of him. Kakashi had once told him that experience goes a long way in changing a man to become someone or something else, and had been right. His death and having to endure childhood a second time had done both horrors and wonders to him. It had broadened his perspective of what kind of person he was. It was also like a test to see whether or not he so firmly believed in the words he'd spoken back in the elemental nations. His catchphrases that said never go back on his word and that there were no shortcuts in life. Naruto let out a soft breath as he rubbed his face. Despite how much he tried to avoid thinking about it all, he just cold. She was coming soon and he'd see her again, a meeting he'd desired so much, but now he was scared. He'd fought the Akatsuki, reanimated shinobi, an army of white zetsu-tailed beasts, and a supposed goddess that been the source of chakra in his old life. Yet reuniting with the person he'd loved the most was the thing that was scaring him the most. It made him laugh. One could say he was feeling a bit pathetic, perhaps he was. Though, oddly enough, it all seemed to vanish the moment he heard some water splash behind him. Throughout all the years he'd come here on occasion, not once had there been anyone besides him, which left only one person in mind. The crimson-haired devil stood up with his back still facing the way he'd heard the gravel crunch beneath a pair of feet, his eyes still pointed toward the waterfall, but not focusing on it at all. Naruto. As the sound of her voice met his ears, he could feel his breath hitch in the back of his throat. You know, despite how many times I've been called that, there is only one person that knows where it's truly from after today. It might be two people that know. When the words left his lips, he turned around, and as his body moved his eyes slowly landed on the same woman he'd fought during the Fallen Angels incident, a person he very much wished to believe was from the exact same place that he was. Her expression wasn't something he'd expect of his former teammate. It was only on rare occasions that she seemed to be overflowing with both happiness but also sadness. I want you to say my name. Sayori? He asked with a raised brow. The woman shook her head and took a step down the road she was standing on, the water of the river separating them for the time being. My real name, if you are who I think you are, then you'd know what I mean by that. Naruto couldn't help but chuckle a bit as his lips lifted upward into a smile. Any doubt in his mind had been washed away by her request as he folded his arms in front of him. I think I can do you one better. And what would that be? She questioned uneasily. The Reed continued to smile as he began to speak. Your name was Sayori Uchiha, the little sister of Itachi, one of the finest shinobi I had the honor of meeting, rookie of the year, well I was the dead last, and a key part of sealing Kagaya Otsutsuki, and also the person I had the pleasure of chazzing all around the world once, and with each word leaving his mouth, had taken another step down the road and toward her. As he got down as far as he could, the tip of his boots just touching the gravel, he chuckled a bit, and also the person I had the pleasure of chazzing all over the elemental nations. But I cold gone without the hole in my shoulder, he teased. It really is you, Sayori whispered out, her body suddenly frozen solid in place. She didn't understand it. All she'd ever wanted for the past 17 years was just on the other side of the road. Naruto also noticed her strange behavior, so he frowned a bit before he forced a few words through his lips. Are you scared? The soft snort left her as she idly touched her arm. Why would I be scared? Because I sure as hell am, he admitted through a sheepish chuckle as he scratched the back of his head. Sayori had to smile a bit at that. She could easily see the sheepish blonde she'd come to know in the reflection of who he was now. Even if his appearance was different, he was still the same dope. Her entire body still felt tense, as if she was reliving all the things she'd done to harm him in the past. She could only shakily grasp at her own sleeve, forcing her eyes away from his, but when her gaze lowered, her heartbeat began to quicken. Once she saw him lift up his arm, extending a hand in her direction, as if she moved on autopilot pilot, her eyes lifted to meet his again, but they were met with no hostility, only the same kindness she'd always known, well, aside from the few things from when they were competing as genin. But even then it never been out of cruelty. She'd lift her hand in a shaky manner and accept the one extended to her, with a sudden rush of warmth spreading through her. Her eyes, which she couldn't get away fast enough before, were practically glued to his, as if waiting for the secret or trick the infamous prankster was about to pull. But it never came. Not so bad, right? He asked after a bit, which in turn made her throw out a quick chuckle. As if that was the cue she'd been waiting for, she reached up and wrapped her arms around him as tightly as she could, staring into his shoulder as she could feel the warmth of his body, keeping her eyes open to make sure that if she blinked, he wouldn't just disappear from her again. It felt a bit silly, but it was a fear she'd acquired. Way too often had she woken up in the middle of the night, dreaming of something that turned out to be just that, a dream. Naruto himself was shocked by the action for a minute, but in the end, he couldn't find it in him to fight the temptation to return the embrace. So he did and brought her in as close as he could. It's good to see you. She nodded slowly against him as her fingers clawed into the fabric of his jacket. I'm sorry. The Redeed raised his brow as he gave her a confused look. For what? If you mean our little fight a few weeks ago, then you don't have to apologize. I wasn't hurt. If anything, it was just an involuntary nap. Sayori shook her head and placed a hand on the left side of his chest, her breathing getting clamber as she felt his heartbeat. No, that's not what I meant. I'm sorry for everything, us being here, it's all my fault. Come on now, don't look at it like that, it takes two to fight as we did, he reassured and gently rubbed her back and looked down at her as she tilted her head back, their eye contact regained, though he immediately knew something was off. Not once in his life had he ever seen her cry, well, if you didn't count their final moments together, at least. So as a few tears started to roll down her cheeks, she rapidly shook her head again. You don't get it, you tried to save me and bring me home, and what I did in return was to take your life. I killed you, she mumbled between a few soft sobs. If you killed me, then I killed you too, we're both here now, aren't we? He argued back and wiped a few tears away from her cheeks. She remained silent, though her body would occasionally do a small twitch as she tried to keep herself calm. Her thoughts were racing inside her head. Everything that she'd ever done felt like it was all coming back to her now. I know I did terrible things and hurt you. I don't want you to hate me. Please don't. Naruto's eyes widened slowly as the meaning of her words settled in his head. I don't. How could you not? I tried to kill you several times and succeeded. I doomed our world, I hurt our friends, I betrayed you and everyone else. She suddenly shouted at his face, the frustration clearly evident on her face. Though what he did next shocked her. She felt his hand cup her cheek and lift her head, but before she could protest or question his actions, she felt her heart skip a beat in her chest as his face inched closer and his lips softly pressed against her own. The pleasant warmth spread throughout her as she felt him kiss her, a sensation she'd wished to experience throughout so many years, both in this life and in her former. Gently she grabbed onto his jacket to keep him there in place and returned the kiss, her eyes fluttered closed to focus on this moment. Closing off all her senses to their surroundings that all of a sudden seemed like the least important things in the world. Instead, she settled for focusing on the lone thing that truly mattered to her. He wasn't 100% sure what had come over him at this moment, but it was safe to say that he didn't regret a thing, not one bit. This was something he'd wanted for the majority of his former life, so to experience it now allowed him to feel the most satisfying feeling he'd only ever dreamt of experiencing back in his days of being a shinobi. Her lips were full and pillowy as he kissed her. He could tell she was startled, but soon enough she had returned the gesture. It only made him tighten his grasp on her, which she seemed to lean into almost instantly. If he'd tried to tell this would be an actuality to his old self back in his genin days, there was no doubt in his mind that he wouldn't believe it one bit, but at last, it had finally happened. The moment felt like an eternity that was over in almost a second, like how you'd explain to people that when you were in love, you'd feel like you'd known each other for your whole life. In a sense they had. As the need for air became a necessity, he'd slowly pull away, her lips looked a tad bit puffier afterward, and he caught himself staring for a bit before his gaze returned to her dark hues. I could never hate you because I love you, I think we established that a long time ago, no? He chuckled slightly as he raised his fingers to play a bit with her hair. Sayori looked up at him with a sense of doubt in her eyes. Do you really? As he registered the question, Naruto raised a brow out of confusion. Have you ever known me to be a liar? Why would I lie about something like that? She slowly shrugged as she wrapped her fingers around his wrist to keep it in place. We were different people back then, in a very different world. Naruto hummed thoughtfully as he slowly let go of her, despite her reluctance to lose her grip, tapping his chin thoughtfully. He stepped down the riverbank and grabbed a nearby rock and skipped it across the water's surface. I don't know about that. With a growingly curious stare, she stepped down beside him and watched him toss the stones one by one. Don't know about what? He gave a small shrug as he examined a stone in the palm of his hand. Do you think you're different? That you're no longer in a Uchiha? "Well, I don't have a Sharingan anymore, so that'd be a dead giveaway," she retorted with a slight smirk. Naruto had to roll his eyes a bit, but couldn't help but smile back at her familiar quirky attitude. "Sharingan or not, an Uchiha is an Uchiha, it's the same for me, Uzumaki chakra or not, I'm still the same me, well, on the inside I guess, I'm sure my current genes would beg to differ from my former statement." She gave him a quiet stare before eventually just nodding her head. "I guess there is some truth to that. It's what I believe at least, as long as I can remember my surname was once Uzumaki, then that's part of who I am, always will be." He chuckled and picked up a stick from the ground, drawing a couple of lines from his memory of the map of the elemental nations and the world. "Well, there is just more in it now. We grew up in a world with only 5 major villages and a handful of smaller ones. It was all on one continent and a couple of islands around it, here. More than I'd be happy to count if we were to include all the places from the different factions and pantheons." Sayori stared at his hand as he drew a map on the ground. Per her own memory, it wasn't very accurate and he had surely mixed a few nations around, but it made her smile nonetheless. "I've missed this about you. My artistic skills?" he asked with a raised brow. With a quick snort, she shook her head. "The way you think. I used to think it was annoying when we first got put on Team 7, but I started to feel different after our mission to Wave. As much as you got on my nerves, it pushed me to do better." He chuckled a bit. "I think we pushed each other a lot," getting a slightly more somber look on his face as he spoke the next sentence. "I missed you too. I never thought I'd see you again," he finished as he scratched the back of his head. "But you did," she replied as a smile began to lift her lips. Naruto looked a bit surprised as he scratched the back of his head. It wasn't often he'd seen her truly smile back in the day, but as always, it was a beautiful and welcome sight. "I guess I did." She chuckled a bit at his behavior before the question that'd been burning in the back of her mind finally escaped her lips. "So what happens now?" Truth be told, had wondered that himself. There were a lot of things he wanted to do, and back in the day, had probably have jumped at any excuse to keep her as close as possible. "What do you want to happen now?" I left the Grigori. I don't want to beat around the bush anymore. I feel like I've run away from you most of my life. Felt like it was about time that I did the opposite," she admitted, trying her best to maintain eye contact, but finding it a tad bit difficult. He'd lie if he said he didn't feel a ton of relief at this moment. Well, her dad had already said she'd left because of him. There was no telling what it truly meant. "I'm glad. I don't want to beat around the bush anymore either." Sayori gave him a smile again as she rubbed the back of her neck. "So is it true that devils get their own pieces to create teams?" "Technically yes, but it's referred to as a peerage. All high-class devils get a peerage set that is like chess pieces, which will then turn people into a devil connected to the said king of that peerage," he explained to the best of his ability. She gave him a slow nod. "So just like my father explained it." "Appears so," Naruto responded. Sayori gave him a look for a bit before her cheeks visibly darkened a bit. "Do you have any free spots left? In your peerage, I mean." Naruto couldn't help but chuckle a bit, which in turn made her give him a blank stare. "What are you laughing about?" she asked in a semi-heated tone. He stopped chuckling at that as he stepped closer. "You beat me to it," he responded and reached down for her hand, slowly lifting her palm up as he placed something there and closed her fingers around it. "This is yours if you want it." Sayori looked up as she rested her hand in his, her eyes staring over him as a small smirk grazed her pink lips. "If this is a pawn piece, I'm beating you up again." "Again?" he questioned with a raised brow. She nodded. "Don't act like I didn't beat you back in the valley when we were genin." Naruto hummed a bit as he chuckled. "Technically we were genin both times we fought in the valley." Sayori rolled her eyes as she slowly unfolded her hands to catch a glimpse of what she assumed was a peerage piece. However, as soon as she did, she could feel her heart skip a beat and a sense of uncertainty wash over her as she gazed down at the red queen piece that was in her palm. In a matter of seconds afterward, she snapped her head up to him, watching his expression that seemed as chill as ice. "What is this?" "A peerage piece," he answered swiftly. "Duh," she said in an exasperated tone, "but are you sure? This is the queen, right?" Naruto gave a slow nod of his head. "Yeah, I mean don't you want it?" She waved her free hand in the air in front of him dismissively before she took a deep breath. "I do, it's just that after everything I've done, would you really trust me with this responsibility? Isn't the job of a queen to be the right hand of the king?" The former blonde let out a slow breath as he curled her fingers up around the queen piece again. "I can't think of anyone that deserves it more than you. Sure, we've had our less than fortunate moments, but you're also the person I can in all honesty say I trust the most to have it. Plus, you know me better than anyone else ever could." "Well, I do suppose it's hard to beat the fact that I know you used to be a knucklehead blonde with no sense for fashion whatsoever," she teased with a glint in her eyes. "Ha, ha, very funny," Naruto sighed with a roll of his eyes. She continued to smirk at him as she fidgeted the evil piece around in her hand. "So how does it work? Do you need some kind of ritual for it?" The Grimory scratched the back of his head. From what I hear, it can be pretty taxing since it turns you into one of us, so I'd imagine we should first go somewhere you can rest. I know my sister said something along the lines of people occasionally passing out after receiving an evil piece. Oh, guess I'll have to check into a hotel then, she sighed and rubbed her temples. Naruto tilted his head in thought, how come? Sayori raised a brow at him, given that I've left the Grigori, I figured I could just stay at a hotel or something until I figured out some new living arrangements. Oh, I see, Naruto hummed as he tapped his chin. Well, I've been staying at my sister's place for a while now. I suppose it's about time that I found my own place. Given that I may stick around here for a bit, I don't really feel like going back to the underworld anytime soon. Why not? Sayori asked curiously. Naruto sighed loudly and scratched the back of his head. Let's just say that my father is a fool, and I'd rather not destroy our home by trying to kick his ass. She shook her head a bit at his antics. Seems like some things don't change. Anyhow, you coming? Sayori tilted her head. Coming where? Naruto gave her a look. To find an apartment or a house. I don't know, something to live in. I don't particularly care what, just as long as it isn't a box under a bridge somewhere. You want us to live together? Aren't we skipping some steps? She teased as she walked up to his side and began to walk with him, the gravel crunching beneath their feet as they made their way back into town without flying, just taking their time, enjoying each other's company. Naruto shrugged, as far as I understand, kings and queens usually live together. If you were thinking of getting us a castle, I'm picking a box under a bridge instead, she said with a deadpan expression. Of course not, though we might have to consider something spacey if we decide to have our future peerage live with us, he noted out loud. Sayori looked up at him from the corner of her eyes as they passed under the crown of some trees, shielding them from the sun and casting shadows around them. That's true, do we have the money for that? Oh, trust me, money isn't an issue, he chuckled with a grin. She had to shake her head at him again as her lips curled upward into a small smile. Slowly she'd reach over to grasp his hand and intertwine their fingers, enjoying the warmth he emitted as she mentally noted that while he might look different, he was still the same. 9L. As he had stated, money hadn't been an issue, so for the majority of the day, they'd just walked sound and talked with various real estate agents, trying to find some kind of house they liked. There were a lot of hits and misses, though there was one that they settled for in the end which they both liked. While the house itself was nice, they'd also picked it because of how close it was located to Kuo Academy, so whenever he had to go there to talk with his sister, it won't be that long for a trip. Plus, Sayori wanted to reconnect with her sister eventually as well, so living somewhere nearby would most definitely help in that regard. The house they'd agreed upon was a 2-story building, with a nice master bedroom and more than a handful of spare ones, 2 large bathrooms, a large joint kitchen, and living room. Aside from that, they had what appeared to be a meeting room. Coincidentally, there was a long table with a total of 16 chairs around it. It had made him chuckle a bit, to which Sayori had to elbow him in the side, so the real estate agent wouldn't think he was a weirdo. He chuckled a bit at the thought as he walked around the table and trailed his fingers along the wooden surface. As he got toward the end of the table and the largest chair, he pulled it out from under the table and took a seat and let a soft breath escape his lips as he leaned back. The equivalent of chairs was the same as the number of peerage pieces you were given, so if he needed to make some grand announcement once he had assembled a full peerage, well, he'd have both space and seats enough for everyone. As he leaned back he gazed out the window behind him and at the setting sun, he'd have to go over to Ria's place before too long to gather his belongings and also inform her that he had gotten his own space. It'd probably make her a bit sad at first, since they'd always been close and sticking together. He just didn't think it'd end well if he tried to have Sayori stay there with the both of them, especially without a proper explanation of what had happened. It'd be a recipe for disaster. As he was sitting there in his own thoughts, he was brought back to the present by the sound of the door creaking open. So this is where you were hiding, he heard Sayori comment as she entered the room and walked up to him. He smiled a bit as he patted the seat to his right and watched her take a seat with an amused look, not hiding, just thinking. So are you ready to get the queen piece? Well, as soon as I pick out a bedroom, sure, she nodded with a casual shrug. We could always stay together, I mean, the master bedroom is big enough for 2, he suggested and scratched his cheek. Her eyes widened a tad bit before she giggled at his behavior. Well, alright then, though I want the right side of the bed. No way, that's the best side, he argued. She shrugged, exactly, and it's mine. Naruto let out a sigh as he rested his elbow on the table and his chin in the palm of his hand. Fine, you can have the right side. Glad to see that we agree, she continued to tease as she leaned back in her seat. As he watched her, soon his lips would fall into a small frown as some thoughts came to mind. Something wrong? He blinked slowly before he scratched his scalp. Kinda, I guess, well, it depends on you. Me? She asked curiously. Naruto bit the inside of his cheek as he tapped his fingers against the table. Do you remember I said that I didn't want to go home because I can't stand my dad? You called him a fool if I recall it correctly. He nodded at that. Thing is, he essentially married my sister off to a guy from another house, someone she pretty much despises, as you probably know. A number of devils have been pummeling down because of wars and crap, so it's all based on politics, but I still hate it. Not sure what that has to do with me, but yeah, he doesn't sound pleasant, she grunted, trying not to voice out too openly what she really thought. It was still Naruto's new dad, so it probably won't be the best to curse him. Naruto chuckled a bit. The evil pieces were created so we could regain our numbers. However, my dad wanted to improve the relationship with another house, and thus arranged for Rias to marry this riser guy. No matter what we've done, we've been unable to break it off. I haven't given up though, but she isn't the only one with some kind of arrangement. The young woman's eyes widened slightly at that as she gritted her teeth behind her lips. So you are engaged. What? No, I probably worded that wrong. Well, I might as well have been, since the number of devils in our house is lower than ever. He gave me a choice to make. He started and fidgeted uneasily in place. What choice? Sayori asked as she reached over to grasp onto his hand for some support. He smiled at her as he wrapped his fingers around her hand. You probably won't like it. I had the choice between an arranged marriage contract with someone from another pillar, that, or since I'm a male devil, produce heirs with more than one woman that'll all take the last name Grigori. There was a long moment of silence, and Naruto could feel the sweat drip down his nose as he looked down at the table, not being able to look her in the eye. It was probably something he shouldered lead with when they met and before he kissed her, but since had been too caught up in the moment of meeting the love of his life, it had all disappeared from his mind as soon as he saw her. So you're to have concubines, correct? As he heard her question, he turned his head to her and gave a slow yet unsure nod of his head. In a sense, I suppose, I figured that, since a lot of male devils have taken mistresses to replenish our numbers, it'd at least have the chance to be with some women that I could come to like. Felt like a more safe gamble than to put all money on 50-50. 50-50? She asked slowly. Naruto turned his head to her and nodded. Yeah, there is no telling whether or not it'd have been able to get along with a fiancé through an arranged marriage, especially if it'd been forced upon her, like Rias. I see, Sayori mumbled as her eyes were slightly shadowed by her dark locks. The Grigori let out a soft breath as he looked over at her and squeezed her hand. I'm sorry, I should said it sooner. If you want to reconsider taking the queen piece now, I understand. Would I be just another concubine to you? She slowly asked. As his mind registered the question, his eyes widened quickly and he rapidly shook his head. What? Of course not. I've said it before and I'll say it again, I love you. If I had to pick any woman to marry, it'd be you. Her body did a small twitch at that as she lifted her head. Her dark hues were wide open as she stared at him before she burst into a fit of giggles. Did you just indirectly propose to me? The surprise was evident on his face as he looked toward the other end of the room. I suppose I did, so what? We already cheated the whole till death do us part crap, he said with a small huff. Sayori smiled a bit at him as she stroked the back of his hand with her thumb. I can't say I like it, but I get that it is politics and part of your family's decision. Just, please, promise me one thing. What's up? He asked with a slow tilt of his head. She let out a slow breath as she bit the inside of her cheek. At least pick some good girls, and don't just treat them like concubines, like you and your sister. They might not have much of a choice, or perhaps they like you. I can't say that I like it, and in honesty, I'd rather keep you to myself, but I've let too much cold control dictate my former life. I won't make the same mistake again. Also, I'd like to know who you well, you know what I mean. If I'm to be your queen, I want to know such things, so I can help and protect you. Naruto could easily tell that it was probably both stressful and to some degree painful to say all that, and he couldn't blame her. Back when he had been told about the arrangement, had at least found peace in the fact he could at least get a good relationship with the girls. But that didn't mean he hadn't thrown a fit like someone his age would, like Rias, had practically torn the door off its hinges and hurled it out the window in protest. Despite all of that, his father had been as stubborn as a boulder, unmoving in regard to his decision. All he could do was to make the best out of it and at least have the person he cherished the most by his side, which made him happy. Everything seemed a bit easier now that she was here. It made him chuckle a bit as he recalled all the times had practically cursed anyone that suggested him being in love with her, especially Ino. That Yamanaka could hit all the right nerves. Well, it was to be expected of the queen of gossip. Thank you, and I promise I won't do you or anyone else wrong. If I have to do this, I'll do it the right way, he reassured. That's nice to hear now. About that queen piece, can we get it over with? I'm honestly quite tired as it is, and if it makes me pass out, well, I can get the sleep of a lifetime. She chuckled slightly. The Grigori looked a bit surprised. You sure you still want the piece? She rolled her eyes. I just said, I won't let things out of my control dictate my life anymore. This is within my control, and I want to stay with you. To become your queen seems like a small and pleasant price to pay. she finished with a teasing grin on her face. The redeed couldn't help but stare at the suggestive smirk on the woman's face as began to feel a bit heated. In order to clear his mind, he coughed into his hand and stood up to his feet. Right, well let's get going then. What's wrong? You looked a bit heated, she kept going as she stood up as well, purposefully leaning up against him, so her chest was slightly pressing into his torso. He looked down at her for a second before he rolled his eyes. You really like to torture me, huh? Perhaps, it's funny, she noted and backed away and began to lead the way toward the master bedroom upstairs. The floor would slightly creak with their footsteps as they entered the dark room. The redeed would reach over the flick on the lights, while Sayuri stood in the middle of the room and looked around. They'd soon join her as he reached his hand forward, and she placed the queen piece in the palm of his hand again. She took a seat on the bed and waited patiently for what was about to happen. I need direct skin contact to make it work the easiest, he spoke in a calm tone as he climbed up onto the bed behind her seated form and knelt on the mattress. Sayuri's cheeks flushed a light pink as she began to unbutton her purple vest, and the button-up shirt beneath, inch by inch, more of her creamy and pale skin, would be revealed as she slid the fabric down her shoulders and arms, letting him stare at her naked back as she leaned forward. Naruto took a deep breath as he raised his palm upward, and the queen piece began to glow as it floated out of his hand and toward her back. He could see the goosebumps begin to rise on her skin as she let out a soft groan as the queen piece entered her back, and before she could ask if he was done, she was taken back by surprise as two wings sprouted from her back. Normally she had 6 wings, but now she had 2, one with dark feathers and the other one like that of a devil. She slowly reached back to touch her new wing before turning back to look at Naruto again. Did it work? Naruto nodded slowly. Yeah, it worked, it's like your sister, 1 wing of each. Well, she hides her fallen angel one but, hey, don't tell her I said that. How are you feeling? With a quick stretch, she leaned back against his chest, almost completely forgotten she was mere inches away from being half naked. Tired. You should get some rest, he commented as he placed his hands on her arms so she wouldn't fall over from exhaustion. She gave him a quick look through half-lidded eyes. What are you going to do? Naruto gave her a small smile as he rubbed her skin, which she seemed to enjoy as she leaned further into him. I'm going to go see my sister, tell her about having found my own place, and get some of my stuff that's over there, then I'll come home. That's sweet, she smiled followed by a soft yawn. What is? He asked curiously. She shrugged a bit as she was failing to keep her eyes open. You already called this home. I guess I did, he smiled down at her as he was about to say something else, though he stopped himself. He noticed her breathing began to get slower and her body heavier. I guess she fell asleep, he inwardly chuckled as he pulled the covers back on the bed and readjusted her clothes, carrying her bridal style as he laid her down on the mattress and tucked her in. As he had made sure she was looking comfortable, he slowed back out of the room as silently as he could, flicked off the lights, and closed the door behind him with a soft click. I guess it's time to go see Rias then, he sighed and began to walk down the hallway, readjusting his jacket as he prepared himself for the conversation to come. 9L. By the time he reached Ria's apartment, it had already gotten dark outside. He let out a soft breath through gritted teeth as she stood by the door and leaned in against the wall. His thoughts were racing. He needed to come up with an explanation that makes sense for his sister because he didn't want to lie. But, at the same time, he didn't think it'd be a good idea to reveal who his new queen was just yet. There was a chance that Rias would misunderstand it, since previously they'd been on hostile terms. Plus, he couldn't exactly tell her that they'd known each other in a past life and somehow managed to reincarnate at the same time and into the same world. Perhaps he'd be able to reveal that to her one day, so she'd truly know who he really was. But with everything going on in their family and with the Phoenix family, he couldn't just jump her with such news. It wouldn't be fair, and he more than anything wanted to help her get some peace of mind. Eventually, he rubbed his face and began to ascend the stairs, taking the spare key had been given out of his pocket and unlocked the door with an audible click. The door creaked open slowly as he walked in and closed it behind him. He took off his shoes in the hallway and hung up his jacket as he scratched the back of his head and walked into the living room was almost completely dark. Naruto? Is that you? He heard his sister call out from the couch as she turned her head toward the hallway. He gave a slow nod of his head as he stood in the doorway. Yeah, it's me. Why are you sitting here alone in the dark? Is something wrong? I've been waiting for you, she admitted as she brought her knees up to her stomach and hugged her legs, patting the seat beside her, inviting him to sit down. I think we should talk. The younger Reed blinked slowly as he walked into the room and took a seat on the couch next to her. Are you alright? Rias shrugged slowly. Not sure, I learned something last night about you. Me? He asked and tilted his head down to look up at her. The crimson-haired beauty took a deep breath as she let her legs down and leaned in against his side. Do you promise to be honest with me? Looking beyond confused, Naruto just nodded and wrapped an arm around his sister's shoulders. Of course, just tell me what's bothering you. I don't like seeing you all troubled like this. Rias gave him a soft smile as she leaned into him. What deal did you make with the Grigori? I met with Akeno's sister, she was looking for you. She found me, yeah, he responded slowly. The Grimory heiress nodded, I see, she said something along the lines of a deal or an offer from the Grigori. I wanted to know why you didn't say anything and what was going on. As he was starting to understand the situation, he inwardly made a note to ask Sayuri later why she hadn't mentioned meeting with Rias. Well, it's never easy to decide whether or not to let someone die. What do you mean? Rias asked confusedly. The younger sibling ran a hand through his blood-red locks and turned to face her again. In short, the Grigori wanted to make up for what happened, and they wanted to extend the offer to a neutral party that wasn't directly affected by the actions of Rainer and the others, since a neutral party would be more likely to listen to what they had to say. And what did they want to say? Naruto bit his tongue and readjusted himself to get more comfortable. They want to give Asia her sacred gear back, and if she hadn't made it, they wanted to give it to us. The thing is just that if I accept, the woman, Rainer, is bound to die. You know what happens when a sacred gear is removed after all. Rias gave a slow nod of understanding. I can understand how it's been difficult then, it's never easy to have blood on your hands. Well, there is more, he started, catching her attention again. They said that I could also get her as a peerage member, to further prove they're sorry, and to try and get a better relationship between the factions. As he revealed that, Ria's eyes began to widen. She has done so much harm though. You couldn't possibly be thinking of accepting that, could you? Naruto sighed and rubbed his forehead. It's not that simple. Of course it is, she harmed several members of my peerage, invaded our territory, stole from Asia, and probably did a ton of equally evil deeds. Rias tried to counter as she grasped onto his shirt, staring him straight in the eye with the most intense gaze he'd ever seen. You won't be safe with her in your peerage. What if she tries to assassinate you? She could stab you in the back with a spear of light and you'd be none the wiser before you're dead. As she began to sound more and more desperate, Naruto placed a hand on her back and rubbed it slowly. Come on, you know I can take care of myself, you trust me, right? Of course I do, it's her I don't trust, Rias answered as she wiped her eyes. I don't want you to die. When he heard the desperation in her voice, Naruto couldn't help himself and wrapped his arms around her in a tight hug that Rias was more than eager to return as hard as she could. Listen to me, it'll be okay, I won't die, I promise you that. If I accept the deal, Asia will get her sacred gear back, and there are safety precautions in place that I'll tell you more about soon. But I want you to know that no matter what, I'm not going to die. How can you be sure? She asked in nothing but a whisper. You know me, I don't lie, so just trust me on this. If Rainer joins my peerage, there is no chance I'm dying, alright? He finished softly and could feel her nod her head against his chest with slow movement. Rias eventually lifted her head and took a breath. What is the safety precaution that somehow guarantees that the crazy bitch won't skewer you? It's a bit complicated, Naruto chuckled. She gave him a blank stare. I can guess it has something to do with Akeno's sister, but I can't figure out what. The younger Reed cleared his throat as he tried to find the words to say. Rainer and her group respect Sayuri because she is the daughter of Barakiel. Like, from what I've heard, it's a deep respect. So? What does their respect for her have to do with you? Rias asked curiously. Naruto bit his lower lip as he began to feel a tad bit nervous. Well, let's just say the trainer won't be my first peerage member. Ria's eyes instantly widened in realization. Naruto, I don't even know where to begin. I have so many questions. And they'll all be answered in due time. But it's true, Sayuri Himejima is part of my peerage now. The red-haired girl shook her head as she rubbed her temples. You never cease to amaze me. And I might have already moved in with her. It was safe to say that the look on Ria's face was a once-in-a-lifetime experience. Thanks for watching.